Let us begin the final analysis of Spellforce 1 Platinum Edition in this case. I will include, for those of you, before we begin the stream, as I usually do, for YouTube viewers, this, yes, I will have to edit it, the metaphysical explanation behind our line of reasoning for the analysis for new YouTube viewers. For those of you who just discovered the analysis on the channel or watching this as a YouTube VOD in the future, I will include the metaphysical explanation behind our philosophy when doing the analysis right now. So let's begin with the definition of our method of analysis, because we have a long analysis ahead of us. Let us begin. As you know, people, if you come over here over at Twitch, if you drop by the Twitch stream, you will realize in my panels I have a lot of explanations about how my analyses are metaphysically realist analysis, basically involving philosophical realism, which is the opposite of relativism, and basically the main premise of a philosophically realist analysis is that when we define metaphysical reality, when we define existence, we don't define it as it is usually unconsciously defined by relativist game reviewers. Generally people, I'll try to do this as brief as possible, when you define reality as the sum of our mental perceptions, opinions, or doxas, as we used to call them in ancient Greece, when you unconsciously define metaphysical reality and metaphysical entities in it as the sum of our mental perceptions, of our opinions, simply the sum of those opinions define reality. That's usually how relativism works. It's a matter of mental perception. It's a matter of opinion. It's something that must have happened to you. It's to you all watching this as a YouTube pod. Pretty much when you have a discussion with someone, it doesn't need to be a violent discussion or anything like that. An intellectual debate, any intellectual debate you could possibly think of, and the person is cornered, the person doesn't have any more logical arguments, generally the person will say, alright, but that's your opinion and this is mine and that's it. That is exactly what we are not going to do here, because that's relativism and because that makes it impossible to transcend our mental perception and define metaphysical reality. Right? It's a matter of two mental perceptions. Relativism generally works like this. Two mental perceptions. You have your opinion, I have mine. But objective conclusions are never reached as a direct consequence of that mindset. That's precisely what we are not going to do. What we are going to do is to use philosophical realism. Why? Because, as I always mention in my analysis, while relativism works at ruling a country, at for example, creating laws or organizing a society in general, we all vote. Think about your own Congress or Parliament. In the case it's a European country, Congress in the case of us, North American and South American countries. And as I always mention, think about those. Think about your own Congress or Parliament. The congressmen basically raise their hands and they vote, and the majority of mental perceptions, of opinions, of doxas, as we used to call them in ancient Greece, rules. We vote and majority rules. That is completely untenable and inefficient, absolutely useless at analyzing isolated objects, because it is impossible to reach metaphysical reality through the simple sum of opinions as your definition of reality. Because a person will have a mental perception, I will have another mental perception, and that's it. We never reach an objective conclusion. This is precisely what we are going to do here on the channel. As I've said, Discarding relativism, we'll use philosophical realism. What's the point then? What's the point? Precisely. Since metaphysical reality isn't the sum of our mental perceptions, but an external entity, an external metaphysical entity, when compared to our opinions, to our mental perception, we will use it because it's more effective at analyzing isolated objects. The example that I always use, and please, well, I gave you a disclaimer for followers of the Twitch channel, and over at Discord they must be fed up of listening to me comment this constantly, pretty much. As I always mention, people, when we do this comparison between two mental perceptions, there will always be one out of two opinions. There will always be one that is closer in its description, in its accuracy of its description of metaphysical reality. The description of metaphysical reality will be more accurate out of two mental perceptions, out of two opinions. Of course, we cannot rule a society or organize it with that, but when it comes to analyzing isolated objects, it's more effective, as I constantly say on stream. Right, people. So I have already given you the theory, the methodology of the theory, the theory of the methodology, sorry, that we are going to employ when analyzing games. But I'll give you also a down-to-earth example that I always do on stream. That's why I say Discord members and followers of the channel, old followers of the channel, they already know about this. But for those of you watching this as a YouTube VOD, pretty much, so I leave it attached to the analysis. Let's get to a down-to-earth example. People, this is a gaming mouse, right? It's a gaming mouse. But what if I asked you, what if I posed the question, why is it a gaming mouse? Is it a gaming mouse? Why is it that your mind defines it as a gaming mouse? Why? Why is it a gaming mouse? The logical answer that most of you would logically tell me, it's absolutely natural, it would be to tell me that this is a gaming mouse, that we refer to it as a gaming mouse, that we call this a gaming mouse, because we have all agreed to call it like that. There you can see the perfect fallacy and inefficiency of relativism at analyzing isolated objects, right? Because if I say that it is correct to call it a gaming mouse, because we have all agreed collectively, the sum of our mental perceptions have agreed to call it like that, and its metaphysical entity has to be referred to as a gaming mouse because we decided collectively to call it like that, there isn't any logical background behind it. It's just the sum of our mental perceptions. Let's get to the realist analysis. This, and you will see the perfect difference if you're watching this as a YouTube VOD, but you'll appreciate it. This is a gaming mouse, because it's the methodology of our analysis. This is a gaming mouse, not because of our sum of mental perceptions. It is a gaming mouse because it's a specific combination of molecules and particles that is so specific, so precisely specific, that could never be, for example, a chair. So, out of two mental perceptions, calling this a chair or calling this a gaming mouse, out of two mental perceptions, there will always be one that is closer in its description to metaphysical reality. Even by 0.0000001%, even by 1%, even by a slight detail, it is objectively more accurate to call this a gaming mouse and not a chair. Why? Because it's a specific combination of molecules and particles that simply is completely different when compared to a chair. The description of calling this a gaming mouse is objective. The existence of this metaphysical entity, it's external when compared to my mental perception. It doesn't matter if my mind decides to call this a chair. It is still a gaming mouse. Even if we all agree to call it a chair, and humanity has been brainwashed to call this a chair for whatever reason, it will still be metaphysically a gaming mouse. Because its metaphysical entity and essence, they are both external when compared to my mind. We can use even a closer example, and I'll prove it to you. Between calling this, we'll use an even more subtle example that I always use. Between calling this a gaming mouse and calling this an electronic device, they are pretty close. It is still more objectively accurate. My mental perception is closer in its description to metaphysical reality, to describing metaphysical reality, if I call this a gaming mouse instead of an electronic device. Why? Even by 1%, even if it is also an electronic device, calling this a gaming mouse also incorporates the idea of shape. This object, this metaphysical entity, it's a specific combination of molecules and particles which has the shape of an animal with which the human race has been in contact with for millions and millions of years, and subconsciously our brain associates the abstract concept of gaming mouse with the shape of an animal that we have been in contact with for millions of years. It has the very same shape, this metaphysical entity. So it is more objectively accurate to describe this as a gaming mouse when compared to describing this as an electronic device. See, even by 1%, even by 0.001% out of two mental perceptions, calling this an electronic device or calling this a gaming mouse, out of those two mental perceptions, it is much more accurate to describe this as a gaming mouse. So it is objectively, it's not a matter of my mental perception, it is more objectively accurate to describe it like that. There's a more objective mental perception out of the two of them, out of three, out of four, out of all of the mental perceptions that humanity is constantly having for every millisecond, constantly, even right now, all human beings. That is the methodology that we are going to apply to our game, that we apply to our game reviews here on the channel and for the final analysis of Sacred 2. We will try through our mental perception, through our reverse engineering of my mental perception in this case, to try to reach metaphysical reality in our description of the game. Direct consequence that philosophical realism has in games is that and it must have happened to you people, is that most game reviewers, most professional gaming press will tell you that the fact that you like or dislike a game, it's a matter of mere subjective mental perception. The second you do that, the second I tell you that a game is good or bad, according to your own opinion, according to your own mental perception, and this is the very reason why relativism is ineffective at analyzing isolated objects like movies, books, video games, or a very gaming mouse, or a simple gaming mouse. It's because relativism changes the focus of the analysis from the object, in this case the video game, to the subject. It changes the focus of the analysis from the object to the subject. In the case of the chair and the gaming mouse, you can call this a chair or a gaming mouse according to your mental perception, without any logical reasons. So, pretty much, in the case of video games, the game will be good or bad depending on my own opinion, on my own mental perception of metaphysical reality. There's no dissociation between metaphysical reality and my mental perception, and the sum of our opinions defines metaphysical reality. And as I've said, that's completely untenable and useless at analyzing isolated objects. It works for organizing a society, it doesn't work for analyzing isolated objects. Or, in this case, it doesn't matter if the object it's materia, it's composed of matter, or if it's composed of bits, in a screen and it's more abstract. Doesn't matter. It's the same concept. So the direct consequence of doing a relativist gaming review is that the quality of a game will be completely subjective according to personal taste. That is precisely what we are going to completely discard and eliminate out of our analysis that we are going to do today. But just so you know the methodology, we will base our analysis on I base all of my analysis on a 5-pronged system that you'll see for the duration of this long review that we are going to do, that will try to reverse engineer my mental perception of the game to reach metaphysical reality, a common ground between all of your mental perceptions of the game and my mental perception of the game, so we can all together reach metaphysical, objective metaphysical reality. Perfect. So the quality of a game, as a conclusion, isn't a matter of personal taste. For example, it's a matter of how do you describe metaphysical reality. It's an objective matter. It is true that one can have preferences, that one can like one genre more than the other one, but for example, I would never say that, I don't know, a game that I liked a lot, subjectively, my mental perception, is the best game of all time. For example, imagine if someone only played Fortnite for 15 or 20 years, which is the case for a lot of people, and they say it's the best game of all time. And most people will have the reaction, when confronted with that claim, that it is wrong. But most people won't be able to tell that person why it is objectively wrong. It's not a matter of our mental perception of it, because we know that the level design complexity, the gameplay mechanic, the abstract model of the gameplay mechanics and their complexity, a lot of things that you'll see once we get to the analysis of Sacred 2, the graphics quality, everything, objectively, in a comparison with other games, Fortnite is simply not the best game of all time. It is objectively wrong to say that, for example. Even if it's your favorite game, that's perfectly acceptable. It's your mental perception. But when trying to reach the common ground of metaphysical reality and describing the metaphysical entity of Fortnite as the best game of all time, it is objectively wrong. See that I can do a dissociation between my mental perception, or in this case the mental perception of that individual. My favorite game of all time is Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I know that there are cases that, for example, Baldur's Gate influenced much more the classic RPG genre, just as a random example. And like that is the same. In the mind of this person who thinks that Fortnite is the best game of all time, subjectively, it doesn't change the fact that objectively, that it is metaphysically objective to consider other games as the best games of all time. Pretty much. So, as a direct consequence, we're not going to do a subjective analysis. I won't tell you that, for example, you will like Sacred 2 as a direct consequence. If you like Diablo 2, you will like Sacred 2, because I'm not giving you a logical reason behind it, which is what most reviewers usually say. Most reviewers usually say if a game is addictive, it's good. If it's not addictive, it's not good. And that's because they are unable to reverse engineer the logical process behind reaching metaphysical reality. They are stuck in their own mental perception. So it is actually addictive. Then the immediate question we should pose is, why is it addictive? Generally because there's a psychological sense of progression which creates that feeling of addictiveness in the brain, in the brain of the player, due to a psychological sense of progression that the game is able to create on the player. Good people, I think that's enough. We have a long analysis ahead of us, so without further ado, you already have the methodology that we are going to use. Everything perfectly explained in a very brief way in 20 minutes. It's a very complex topic to talk about in 20 minutes. If you like the topic, I highly recommend you drop by the stream and we talk about it as we usually do if you are watching this as a YouTube pod in the future. Alright, welcome back. For those YouTube viewers that are not familiar with the channel, with the Twitch channel, and with all of the explanation that we have here in the panels, that basically ensures that anyone who pops into the stream knows what's going on. Okay, people, now that we're all on the same page, YouTube viewers with the metaphysical explanation and Twitch viewers that know the channel directly. Alright, we begin with the final metaphysical analysis of Spellforce 1 Platinum Edition. Indeed. We have a lot of things to cover. We played the game for 23 days. Those are the first things that you need to know. I didn't complete all of the side quests, but I did finish the main campaign of the game. Now, the game has two more campaigns, the Aren campaign and the Phoenix campaign, that pretty much finish the plot line of the main campaign. But I think it's more than enough. It's more than enough to have finished the main campaign of the game to get to the final metaphysical analysis of it, because basically I've already covered the gameplay mechanics of the 6 races completely, the hero mechanics, everything the game had to offer pretty much. So keep that in mind. The game has more side quests and 2 more campaigns. In terms of the level design, please remember that in your head once we get to the level design category of the analysis. Okay, but before we get into that, we begin with not even the first category of the analysis, not even the gameplay category, but something important related to it, which will lead us into it, which is the genre classification. We begin the analysis, indeed, final analysis of Spellforce 1 Platinum, with the genre classification of the game. Indeed. And I'm mentioning this point because it's a very, very important one, specifically in this case. Because this game attempted to do what another game that you'll see that I'll constantly reference, called Heroes of Annihilated Empires, tried to do. Which is mixing precisely 2 styles of gameplay, which are RTS and RPG. So, there we go. That one is that one. Sorry, it's the first time I do the transition. It's the first time I'm kind of like unifying the YouTube analysis with the Twitch analysis. So the first thing that we have to take into account is the genre classification. RTS and RPG. It's a marriage that RTS developers try to do for quite a lot of time, beginning precisely with Warcraft 3. Pretty much popularized it with Warcraft 3. Pretty much. So, what did they try to do? Warcraft 3, Heroes of Annihilated Empires, and Spellforce 1 in this case. They tried to combine both genres in a way that you have some gameplay elements from one and from the other, pretty much. The thing is the proportion to get into the genre classification of this game, because otherwise we cannot analyze it. Is it an RTS or is it an RPG? What's the predominance of the proportion in the gameplay mechanics precisely in the first category of the analysis? Well, while there are RPG elements in all of these games that I'm mentioning, Warcraft 3, Heroes of Annihilated Empires, etc., the proportion in those 3 cases precisely is a predominant RTS portion of the gameplay mechanics, pretty much. They are all RTS games, including Spellforce 1. Of course, Spellforce 1, Warcraft 3, and Heroes of Annihilated Empires, they are all real-time strategy games in every sense of the word, with RPG elements. Not the other way around. Not an RPG with real-time strategy elements. Okay, now that we have the framework, let's get straight into the category, which precisely is the proportion that I mentioned at the beginning. In the case of Spellforce 1 Platinum, when we try to establish a direct comparison with titans of the RTS genre, as I just said, it's a real-time strategy game, even if it has RPG elements, we need to pay attention to a very, very important thing, which is the key of this analysis, besides the level design that we'll get into a moment later. But let's stop for a moment into analyzing this proportion. You know that in real-time strategy games, there's something called micromanagement and macromanagement, right? Micromanagement is how you handle unit abilities or how you position them on the battlefield to effectively neutralize the enemy force, pretty much. While that's micromanagement, while macromanagement is how efficiently you develop the grand scheme of things, the general layout of your strategy, on how to develop your base, for example, on how your economy in general will be, and pretty much how you manage more general aspects of the gameplay mechanics, like the build order, for example, like the build order of your base, the economy of your base, everything related to the base building aspect of the real-time strategy game. In that sense, very, very, very interesting. It's a very, very old school classification that is quite effective. That not a classification, it's the how the different elements that the genre is composed of, pretty much. They are unique elements to the real-time strategy genre, because, for example, a MOBA only has micromanagement. It's only the unit. You don't macromanage a base, basically, or anything like that. Okay, so we have those two elements, right? The proportion of those two elements matches. I know this is a very, very abstract topic to imagine, but pretty much that's why I also decided to include gameplay and everything here with the game. Those two aspects match. They match this proportion of the gameplay mechanics, and by that proportion I mean how you reward the player. A perfect real-time strategy game, even if it's a crossover between real-time strategy or RPG, is that in which there's a perfect proportion between rewarding the player for having good APM, actions per minute, how fast you pretty much click and use your hotkeys and your control groups with the game, basically assigning 1, 2, 3, 4 the different numbers on your keyboard to the different building structures and units, which, by the way, in this game you cannot assign control groups to buildings, only to units. The proportion between how the developer decides to reward the player for having good APM and for having good strategy, and notice that they match. The overall rewarding the player for having a good strategy, correct build order, correct army composition according to the weaknesses and strengths of the units in a perfect rock, paper, scissors system. How the developer rewards the player for doing that correctly, macromanagement matches that, and how the developer rewards the player for having good micromanagement, pretty much the APM, and how he handles the unit's movements, positioning, and pretty much everything. Let's get into some comparisons to begin with. In the case of StarCraft 2, Age of Empires 2, and Warcraft 3, which would be the most similar case. In the case of StarCraft 2, it has a perfect proportion, 50-50, pretty much. StarCraft 2 evenly rewards players for having a correct build order, a correct a prosperous economy, and pretty much managing the setting up your defenses, for example, or developing the upgrades. Everything that is related to macro management is perfectly rewarded. For example, when you go up against the banelings, the zerglings that explode, that they just roll on the floor, that they are all green and they splash with green energy and do area of effect damage. For example, those are effectively countered by the Protoss Templars that can do the area of effect ability, micromanagement. But in order to develop the Templar in the first place, you need to have a properly developed base by the time you reach mid-game, for example. So, macromanagement and micromanagement are both properly rewarded. I grabbed the example of the Templar Protoss unit because it's very, very visual and evident. It kind of like has an area of effect ability, which is the Psionic Storm, and can kill several of those banelings in one blow of that ability. Okay, so an evenly rewarded real-time strategy game, StarCraft 2. 50-50 pretty much, for having perfect macro management and perfect micro management. Properly developing your base to create the correct units with the correct build order, with the correct economy, with the correct defenses, with the correct pylon placement, for example, and micromanagement, moving those Templar units perfectly so they are not ambushed by the banelings or whatever situation you want to imagine, and they can use their area of effect ability perfect surgically calculated to pretty much be done with them. Okay, let's get into the example of Age of Empires. Age of Empires 2. Pretty much in Age of Empires the races are symmetrical rather than asymmetrical, and that has the direct consequence that the gameplay is slower, but it has more abstract complexity. Definitely Age of Empires 2 has more abstract complexity in the macro management specifically. In the case of StarCraft 2, it's very, very fast. A skirmish match can take 15 minutes easily. In Age of Empires 2, it can take 2 hours easily. And but the complexity in the macro management in Age of Empires 2 is much, much higher. In StarCraft 2, it might be higher in terms of the micromanagement because of the abilities. Okay, in Age of Empires 2, you have to deal with 4 resources instead of 2, instead of the minerals and the gas. You have to deal with gold, stone, wood, and food. You have to deal with those 4 pretty much. And not only that, there are more upgrades for all of the symmetrical races, so it goes for all of them. So because of all of those things, the macro management in Age of Empires 2 is higher. It's higher in that proportion. In how the developer, remember, how the developer is rewarding, because this is I know that I'm talking about other games, but it's a comparison that you need to do when trying to understand Spellforce 2. The developer in that case is rewarding the player a tiny bit more. Let's say that Age of Empires 2, it's a 60-40. It's a 60-40 for having proper macro management, proper economy, and etc. than micromanagement, because in Age of Empires 2, and this is objective once again, people, going back to the metaphysical explanation that I will include that I have included by now for YouTube viewers. Pretty much, in Age of Empires 2, the objective element is that units do not have abilities like in StarCraft 2. In StarCraft 2 they do. Some of them are pretty much auto-triggered, like in Warcraft 3. Like for example the Zealot Charge. And other ones you have to activate them, like the Psionic Storm, surgically at the correct position. manually as well. So pretty much, even if the proportion in Age of Empires 2 favors, even if the developer favors rewarding the player for having good macro management instead of micromanagement a bit more, even if it's a 40-60 proportion in favor of macro management and in detriment of micromanagement, it is still very, very, very balanced. It's pretty much the perfection of the genre. Age of Empires 2 as well as StarCraft 2, that's why they are the kings of the genre, because they have a proper, perfect proportion between rewarding the player for having good macro management and good micro management. Correct? Now let's get into the closer case of Warcraft 3. In Warcraft 3, it's the opposite of Age of Empires 2, and it's not the proportion of StarCraft 2. In Warcraft 3, micromanagement is much more important. Let's invert that 60-40 in favor of micromanagement, instead in favor of micromanagement in the case of Warcraft 3. It's precisely the opposite of Age of Empires 2 in that case. Races that are very asymmetrical, similar to StarCraft, but it has the added component of having a heavier use of pretty much active abilities and auto-triggered abilities to enhance combat in battle, so much that even in a skirmish match you have to use a hero unit that has an inventory. So it's heavier on the RPG department in that sense. There we can see the correlation that I wanted to get to precisely. Real-time strategy games that include RPG elements are more demanding on micro management than macro management, which is a direct comparison with the Spellforce one that we are analyzing here today. And that shows, so Warcraft 3, it's a 60-40 comparison in favor of micromanagement and in detriment of macro management. While it is true that you have to properly develop your base, the correct build order, the correct economy, the correct Ziggurat placement, defensive placement for your the Ziggurat is basically the structure that provides an increased population cap, that provides population that increases the population cap for the undead race, and at the same time is the defensive structure. So, for example, that one, placing them around, for example, your metropolis, which is the main base of the undead race, for example, in Warcraft 3. Pretty much an example that I just thought of. That is very, very illustrative of what macro management is. Well, the economy, etc. But in Warcraft 3, regardless of that, the micromanagement is crucial, especially because of the pathfinding that the game has. It exaggerates it even more because of the pathfinding. Like, properly surrounding a unit is very important because it cannot escape. In StarCraft 2, it's much more difficult to do that because of how faster it is. Okay, getting into Spellforce. How does that proportion work in this game? And we finally get into the gameplay category of the analysis. Remember for a sec. How does it work? How does this proportion that I have been mentioning with these three direct comparisons with the kings of the genre, how does it work? This proportion of the developer rewarding the player for having good micromanagement and good micro management. But I had to explain all of those concepts to start this comparison, pretty much. How does it work in Spellforce, people? Okay, in terms of the gameplay mechanics, and that proportion specifically, in Spellforce, in Spellforce, pretty much you have 6 races, 6 main races, human, elf, dwarf, then orc, troll, and dark elf. They are not perfectly symmetrical like in Age of Empires, of course, but they are not as asymmetrical and unique as in Warcraft 3, for example, or StarCraft 2. In fact, they are similar between themselves, because then they are divided into kind of like, let's say, good side races and dark side races, let's call it. The game doesn't call them like that, but it's an appropriate classification for them. Let's say that the human, elf, and dwarf races are pretty much good races, and the dark side races are the other 3, orc, troll, and dark elf. Throughout the campaign you use all of them. Okay, but how does the developer rewards the player for having good macro management and good micro management in the case of Spellforce 1? Well, for starters, as I've said, it's much more similar to Warcraft 3, so it favors micromanagement, because you have a hero unit, you have to cast your abilities. For example, there you can see that I'm using some hero units in the gameplay. That you have to, for example, like have an aura that lowers enemy damage in an area, not in an area of effect. It individually targets them as my unit gets closer, one by one. Or Aura of Slow Fighting. There you can see the other one. That one there is Aura of Slow Fighting, the one blinking there. And pretty much you can have more than one hero unit throughout the campaign, and I presume in a skirmish match. So you have several hero units that you have to micromanage. And for the rest of your units, they don't have abilities. It's not like Warcraft 3 that some normal units have abilities. So in that sense, it has micromanagement. It's not as complex as in Warcraft 3. It's not as complex. There's not that much positioning, except for one case in which your mages in this game, you have to continuously press H. So let me fast forward this so you have another part of the gameplay. You have to press H in order to prevent them from engaging in melee before depleting their mana resources, but pretty much they don't have abilities. Normal units in this game don't have abilities, only the hero units. So, and in the case of macro management, so lower micromanagement, which would favor higher macro management. And in the case of macro management, there's a very interesting concept in this campaign, which is the concept of a stealth. In this game, and this is a bit more related to the level design, but I have to include it here. When you start a new scenario of the campaign, a new level, you will always start without a base. And as you create a base, I'll expand on this point in the level design category of the analysis. As you get into the base, it's when you will start being attacked. Previously to that, you can use your hero unit to try to kind of like dispatch the smaller bases of any scenario of the campaign. Okay, so in terms of that, this game favors correct macro management. I would say it, ironically, rewards the player much more for having a correct initial build order, a correct economy. As you can see, there are 7 resources. It's just that you don't use them simultaneously. 7 resources that you can see there. For example, I think you can see my mouse here. You can see my mouse. You should. Here we have wood, stone, iron, moon silver, area, and linear, and food. Pretty much. You have all of those. You have 7 resources, and pretty much you have to pick, and this leads me to the race, to the civilizations and races descriptions that I was doing. Different races use different resources. The 3 main good side races, human, elf, dwarf, use different resources between themselves. They are kind of like encapsulated. And then the dark side units, they are kind of like mirrors of them with slight differences. For example, the dwarves use a stone as the main resource, and then iron to produce the main basic units, and most of the units in fact, and then they use moon silver. In the case of the elves, the good elves, not the dark side elves, that are kind of like inside of that good side package, they use wood for the initial units and structures, and then linear for the more advanced units. But see that they don't touch each other. So we have wood and linear. Here we have the elves with wood and linear, and here we have the dwarves with stone and iron. That allows you to control both bases at the same time. The same goes for the dark elves and the trolls. The trolls use a stone. The dark elves use, for example, they use iron for the basic unit, and an area for the structures. So it's a combination of those 7 resources that are differently distributed between those 2 encapsulated packages of good side races and bad side or dark side races. Let's say they are not even evil in the case of this game. You just use them interchangeably in that sense. Okay, so because of all of these, the game has an emphasis on macromanagement. I think it's not properly proportioned. Because it has so much emphasis on macromanagement that it then affects the level design. We can see it right now, a direct influence of the gameplay mechanics on the level design. I'll have to touch a bit of the level design here. Don't worry, I won't get it 100% in it. Basically, as you start one of the missions, you start without a base. Always. It's always the case like that with your hero unit. And you get to a base 100% of the cases, 100% of the cases, you get to a base, or 2 bases as you clear the area, only with your hero unit. That can take a lot of time. And the second you create a base, you start being scouted. That's why I mentioned the concept of a stealth. You start being scouted. If you don't kill the scout that any of the enemies on the map send, for example, in this gameplay you don't see it, but they just send 1 unit to scout you, and with a yellow dot on the minimap, with a yellow signal on the minimap that indicates it, an alert. And if you don't kill it, and sometimes it's 2 scouts or something like that you cannot kill only with your hero unit, they send their full attack force gradually, but still their full attack force from several bases. This game has in every single scenario of the campaign is a 1b3, b4, b5, b7, b10. It's a skirmish in which I don't want to get into that, but it's basically a skirmish against several enemy bases. So the problem is that the macromanagement mechanics have such predominance in this case that it affects the initial early game gameplay mechanics of a skirmish, and for that matter, all of the scenarios of the campaign, which can make this game very frustrating to play. very, very frustrating in that sense, because most of your losses will be in the early game gameplay mechanics of all of the scenarios of the campaign as you are developing your base. That is the key. That is the key. That is the key. It's very, very disproportionate, the predominance of macromanagement mechanics. Now, I complained a lot about another RTS game called Heroes of Annihilated Empires regarding the level. No, we'll save that for the level design. Let's save that for the level design because it's the level design. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics directly into the combat. But just keep all of this that I'm saying in your mind. The proportion of how the developers are rewarding you as a player for, objectively, for having good macro management and good micromanagement. Remember it, because it's the main problem of the game that is not perfectly proportional, but it's related to the level design that we'll get to in a minute. Let's get into the gameplay that shouldn't take that much because it has some specific aspects, but nothing way too complex. Basically, both your hero unit and the rest of the units of the game behave in a hybrid mode between an RPG and an RTS. You have accuracy, probability of landing a blow. You have evasion. It has a different naming convention. I think it's influenced by dexterity or something like that. Evasion, you have accuracy, evasion, you have different types of natural, black magic, fire magic, etc. As I've said, black magic, natural magic, all of those. And you have the classic attributes of strength, how much damage your attacks cause. And you also have agility, attack. I think there's another one for attack speed. And those, it has the classic, it has a myriad of stats that would belong in an RPG game. In that sense, it's very well done. In that sense, the gameplay is very well done because the abstract complexity is higher than Warcraft 3. The abstract complexity of the RPG portion, not the gameplay mechanics as a whole, the RPG portion is higher than Warcraft 3. You have an infinite inventory. I think I filled 28 pages of inventory with different pieces of gear that you have to that you can equip, like in Diablo. You have a main hand slot, a secondary hand slot, headgear, chest, trouser, legs. Sorry, pretty much rings. You have a lot of those with different the variety of the item system of the game and the RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics, for that matter, is pretty well done. It has higher abstract complexity than Warcraft 3. In Warcraft 3, you only equip some few either passive or usable items, but some 6 items like that without developing skill tree. In this game, there's a skill tree, and you can manipulate the stats of your character. You can create a build. You have to create a build, basically. And according to the stats that you distribute, they will enable you to spend points as you level up to level 30. I presume in Warcraft 3 the maximum was 10, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the campaign. Pretty much this game, if there's something positive that we have to say, is that the game properly expands upon the RPG element of Warcraft 3. The RPG element is objectively properly expanded. You have your stat system that you can manipulate. You have an expanded inventory compared to Warcraft 3 with several options. You can also loot weapons with poison effects, pain effects, etc. It's much more expanded. And that stat system that you can manipulate, then, according to your stats, it will enable, for example, you need a specific amount of... I also forgot about intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is how fast your mana pool regenerates, for example, in this game. And wisdom is the total amount of mana. See, you can see that it's much more complex than just Warcraft 3 in the RPG department. That is very positive and a feat that is difficult to achieve in that sense. In the case of, as I was saying, those stats influence the skill tree of the game. Yes, it also has a skill tree. So it has a stat system that you can manipulate. You can spend your stat points in it. Then you have an expanded inventory, but it also has a skill tree that Warcraft 3 doesn't have. Your stats will limit the branches of the skill tree that you can pick, which are basically developing your capabilities as a tank. For example, investing points on shields that will increase your evasion of enemy attacks. I don't know, piercing weapons. It has long blade weapons. It has different types of weapons, even in the form of two-handed weapons, one-handed weapons, shields, as I've said, daggers. They have different attack speeds, different effects, etc. And you develop the expertise of your character using those with the skill tree. Basically, you invest points on piercing weapon, on proficiency, or in piercing weapons, slashing weapons, two-handed weapons, etc, etc, etc. Now, most new players will probably ruin it, just like I did. I created a Necromancer tank build in order to use my hero unit as a tank, while the rest of my army is pretty much just a DPS, a massive mass of DPS, a mass of DPS units, range DPS units. Usually I usually use, sorry. So basically like that, but you have different strategies that you can try out. I would say mine was the best that I went for intuitively, but well, doesn't matter. So you have different branches of the skill tree that you invest your points, and they are limited by the amount of wisdom. For example, you cannot go beyond, let's say, level 5 black magic if you don't have 40 points, something like that. I'm using random numbers. 40 points on intelligence, that is mana regeneration. I think it was like that pretty much. But then those skill trees have sub-branches that are tied to the main branch. What do I mean by this? That you cannot go over the level of invested points on the main branch of the skill tree. Sorry, you cannot go over the main, you cannot go, no, I was right. You cannot go over the main level of the branch of the skill tree. Yeah, like if shield proficiency is at 5 as a sub-branch of a skill tree of, I don't know, no, I think it would, no, let's do short weapons. Short weapons is the main branch of the skill tree. There you have it. There you have it, pretty much. There you have it, so I can illustrate it. For example, there you can see it, I posted. There you have heavy combat arts, I forgot about the name, sorry. There you can see that I have 7 points, on heavy combat arts. I knew that it was going to show sooner or later. There you can see that I have 7 points on heavy combat arts here. But then you can see that I have shields level 7. I cannot go over this 7 without first investing my points here. That's why when you level up, you are granted 2 points that you have to distribute. They are shared here. 1 for the main branch and 1 for the sub branch. Or you can spend both on the sub branch, but you cannot go over the main branch of the skill tree. And the main branches, these 3, for example, my main branches are in yellow: light combat arts, black magic, and heavy combat arts. These three are influenced by the stats that you have. For example, black magic cannot go over 7 without probably this amount of intelligence. As you can see there. Well, it also had a stamina that I didn't pay much attention to. That is kind of like overall amount of health. In that sense, I have to say that in terms of the paradigm of min-maxing, remember, min-maxing is a phenomenon in which we invest all of our points in a character build. This is a concept of the RPG genre, but in this case, it's pretty much like that. This game encourages min-maxing like crazy, because then this is pretty much the phenomenon in which you spend all of your points min-maxing on a single stat, for example, all on strength, to the point that the only thing that matters in the gameplay mechanics then is only the base attack damage. Generally in RPG games, as I've said, it's dexterity for the rogue and intelligence for the... It's not the case with this game, but in RPG games, it's like that, or the mage. And intelligence for the mage, dexterity for the rogue, and strength for the warrior, naming conventions vary from game to game, they influence the base attack damage, and if you increase the base attack damage and one secondary stat like critical rating, like, I don't know, attack speed, if you do that, then you basically won the stat war, let's say, of the game. Pretty much, because that happens with Diablo 3 in the RPG, in the asymmetric action RPG genre. Because if you just increase base attack damage plus critical rating, that's basically min-maxing. You just spend your points there without caring about your overall health, without caring about your mana, nothing at all. It's just one-dimensional like that. That's the paradigm of min-maxing that very few games manage to break through. In the case of this game, since it's not a full-fledged RPG, the stat system that it has, pretty much directly encourages min-maxing, which is worse, because I did the opposite. I evenly distributed my points between, I think it was this one, agility is evasion rating in this game. Agility is evasion rating. I distributed my points to have evasion rating, so I could act like a tank. Intelligence, because I needed for the black magic, for the damage, to summon skeletons. To be a necromancer, you need that. This is pretty much mana regeneration, intelligence, and then the rest went to strength. Right? I used those three stats, and doing that locked me out of a lot of end game pieces of gear. That's why the stat system of this game is a perfect example of min-maxing in action. The game directly encourages you to hit the cap. It has a cap of 68, something like that, for the campaign. It has a cap of 68, something like that. It has a cap for all of the stats, and it encourages you to just spend points on that stat, so you can unlock all of the gear that all of the high-level gear that you will loot from corpses of enemies on the ground. Basically, that is the key. This game is the paragon. It is the most paramount example of min-maxing, the quintessential, the most classic example of min-maxing exaggerated to 1000% in a game. That's why the stat system is not executed properly, objectively, because you don't have access to the end game level gear without spending at least all of your points on one of the stats to take it to the maximum. You cannot evenly distribute your stats and get access to high level gear. You can still finish the game. That's the redeeming factor. That doesn't end up breaking it. But still, it's not properly balanced. Because what would have been a perfectly balanced scenario, that you can spend your stats in such a way that if I want to have a lot of stamina without evasion, for example, I can still be as efficient in combat as with the evasion rating, as I was indeed at the end of the day effective with the evasion rating, to be as effective in combat with any stat distribution, and it's not the case. Let me assure you that I've read a lot of people online saying that they were extremely frustrated with the game and most of them couldn't finish it because of how the stat system tricked them into thinking that they could create any build, and no, you cannot create any build and survive. In my case, since I have a lot of experience with RTS games and these things, even if I didn't read about the game, I pretty much managed to create a decent build, and I still had issues. Without this poison blade that you see here, for example, my strength would have been too low to dispatch the initial early game gameplay mechanics enemies before you have access to a base to properly get through the campaign, to pretty much get through the campaign, because otherwise if you don't have damage you cannot pick the enemies one by one until you can get access to the base that we'll get to in a minute, which is actually the monument, the concept of the monument in this game. Very unique. And create your army to complement the hero unit. The hero unit is pretty much alone at the beginning of each level of the campaign. That is why that influence that I mentioned at the beginning of the level design on the gameplay mechanics is dangerously created. Dangerously because it's prone to fail. It is riddled with flaws. Because having a non-min-maxed stat system, a non-min-maxed build, having a non-min-maxed build, a balanced, evenly distributed build with the stat points evenly distributed, can cause the player. It can easily cause the player to be stuck at the beginning of the early game gameplay mechanics for each level of the campaign. You can spend, and I had to spend, almost 2 hours in most of the endgame levels of the campaign. 2 hours, huh? And you can watch the bots. It's not an exaggeration. 2 hours only with your hero unit to just clear the base for your initial placement, of your base, to have the minimum amount of troops to pretty much create some basic units and start defending against enemy attacks, against waves of enemy attacks. I know that the scouting mechanic was included to, I presume the scouting mechanic was included potentially to mitigate this original issue that they created, but the correct solution would have been preventing, as I always mention every single day, not encouraging or preventing a min-maxed stat system. See how all is perfectly integrated, how the influence of the gameplay mechanics, in this case the stat system of the game, has a direct impact or unwanted impact, a side effect on the level design. That is the thing. But this is still part of the gameplay. That's why I included in the gameplay category of the analysis. So you have your stat system. It influences the main branch of the skill tree. In order to get to this 7, you need to have a specific amount of stats here. The sub branches of the skill tree influence the main branch. The main branch influences the sub branch of the skill tree. The sub branches cannot go over the main one. The main one cannot go over its limit. without investing points on a specific stats. The game encourages min-maxing all the time. Because of that encouraged min-maxing, the level design is negatively affected in the early game gameplay mechanics stage, because you can spend up to 2 hours just clearing bases. This is exponentially worse because the game doesn't explain all of these extensively in the first levels of the campaign, in that sense. And because of that, it's easy for any new players. In this case, I did it blindly in my first playthrough of the game. I didn't have to reload the campaign like a lot of people had to do it without reading. But it's because I pretty much have a lot of experience with RTS and RPG games. But reading online, I saw a lot of people complain about this, and I wanted to precisely mention it because I agree with them that the game can become extremely tedious because of that, but most reviewers precisely don't get to the underlying issue and explaining it on a metaphysical objective level, like this, pretty much, because it takes a lot of time to think about all of the aspects that it has and the consequences that it has. So pretty much you also have resistances there, and fight speed, cast speed, and run. The speed at which you deal, you perform attacks is also related to your weapon there. So pretty much, people, that's it. Here you can see this is the inventory. This is the build plan. These are the build plans for your units, which is the next thing that I wanted to cover. This is the inventory, the quests, the quest log. Here you have kind of like the rune board, and the here the quests. This is the build plan, the build plans for your units, for your different races, and I think that one is the spell book. This one is the rune board and the inventory. There we go. And this is the stat system, pretty much. So as you can see, these are the rest of the hero units. You can also recruit up to 6 hero units. And let's get into another important aspect of the game, which is pretty much covering all of those things. How does this game manage, because this is the RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics, the pure RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics. Let's get into the RTS portion of the gameplay mechanics that you have been watching all the time with this base that I have here. There, that building that you can see, the Troll Monument, what happens, let's do kind of like a mental sequence of what happens after what I just mentioned, after the RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics of going only with your hero unit, as you will start all of the quests. You manage after 2 hours with all of these flaws to get into one of the monuments. Those buildings that you just saw were the monuments. As I see one, I'll stop the video. Let me see if I can show you one that I have selected that I just saw. Pretty much. Here I'll show you the monument. As you spend all of your time, there, for example, there you have the building plan. But as you there we go, the Troll Monument. That is the monument. So you kill all of the bases that you can. You cannot destroy. Sorry, you kill all of the units that are lying around in the game, that they are not active bases. That's the key to understand this game. As you start a level, you go with your hero unit, with all of the flaws that I just mentioned, with the RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics. You can kill some enemies. You can even destroy some of their bases. That are inactive at that point. You get into the level. You fight only with your hero unit, RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics that I had to explain. You kill some of them. You cannot take all of the bases. You will never be able to take all of the bases because some of them are densely populated on purpose. And you get to this building. This building is the monument. There's a troll monument. There's a monument for each of the races, for human, elf, dwarf, troll, orc, and dark elf. They all have different monuments. And each level of the campaign gives you a different composition of these elements. So you get here and you start producing units, as you can see. You have your PopCap here. They are differentiated. They are kind of like split. You have your worker PopCap and your military PopCap, and there you can see the rune power, which determines the speed at which you produce units. So you produce the basic worker unit to start developing your base and doing your macro management, and of course it has some light upgrades. The game doesn't have a lot of complexity in that sense. And you can create different units that you see down there. Of course, the units that you can produce are limited by the build plans that you have looted previously in a previous scenario of the campaign, precisely. In order to have access to the buildings for your base, to just create the buildings for your base, you need to loot something called a build plan, which is basically an object from a dead enemy. And then the unit plan. To create all of those units that you see down there in the tab, they are actually granted to you from the dead corpse of an enemy that had a unit plan, and previously to that a building plan, because you need to have access to the specific buildings in order to create them. Now you start your base, you can expand, you have basically small, medium and large headquarters. The abstract complexity of the macro management of the game is properly executed, with the small, medium and large headquarters influencing the maximum amount of workers that you can have to gather the different resources. And the build plans that you loot and everything basically influence your access to different buildings and units that you progressively unlock throughout the campaign. All of that is perfectly executed. The rune power remains at 80, as you can see there, that I was deducing pretty much. At that point I remember it. It remains at 80. It remains at 80 if you have more than one base, apparently. If you control two races, but normally if you have only one, it stays at 100. So basically, you create you develop your base. You have a small, medium, and large headquarters. You expand your PopCap universally. This is the same for all of the races, with food that you can see up there. With food, basically, you can even create Titan units. You can go for ranged units. You have a pretty good variety of those. There you can see that I'm expanding the base to gather wood. There, pretty much. You have a pretty good gameplay variety in that sense, and the extra complexity is very well executed. Those are all of the positive aspects of the game. The micromanagement is also properly executed, but still, it's extremely unbalanced, because of that gameplay influence on those early game gameplay mechanics moments of the campaign. It's very unbalanced, because most of your losses will be when you are starting a base, precisely because the enemy will attack you with a lot of with the scout, and sometimes the scouts are way too powerful, and if your hero unit cannot dispatch them, and sometimes you have to deal with several bases sending scouts to your initial location, you're stuck. It happened to me up until the last level of the campaign. That's how the game increases difficulty, basically, in the early stages of the campaign. Not even mention what happened to me once, which is the fact that I skipped some build plans for the dwarf civilization. It is easy to skip some of the build plans in some specific instances because they are behind trees or somehow not properly visible. That's a terrible flaw as well. But pretty much in terms of the gameplay mechanics, and then it's a matter of rock, paper, scissors, the classic system of some units being vulnerable to range attacks, some of them vulnerable to melee attacks, some of them vulnerable, having black magic resistance against the blades, like the dark elves. Pretty much. You have the classic rock, paper, scissors system. A bit more complex because it includes resistances like an RPG, so in that sense the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics is higher than the average RTS. And well, you can see that throughout the course of the gameplay, that you can create defensive structures, you can create pretty much food to expand your PopCap, as I've said, that's shared. You have buildings that double the production of the resource gathering buildings, of the economic buildings, and then the upgrades for the units, defensive structures, the usual stuff that you see in an RTS. There you can see the PopCap is at 80, for the military PopCap is at 80, and pretty much the worker PopCap is at 50, if I'm not mistaken. It's at 50. And pretty much with that, I think I covered all of the buildings of the game, but I want to get into a very, very specific mechanic that is also defining of Spellforce 1. It's very, very defining. The unified queue. Pay attention there, people. That's the queue. There you can see the troll monument. The unified queue. There you can see, yeah, worker PopCap is 50 and the military PopCap is 80. You expand it as you get the build plans and you create all of the buildings of your base as you develop your base. Basically, with small, medium, and large headquarters increasing the worker PopCap, and food being the resource responsible for an upgrade that then increases your military PopCap slowly. From you start with 10, then you go to 15, 20, 25, 30, then you jump to 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. See? Not even looking it up. So, I want to stop in a very genre, well, not genre defining, game defining element. In the case of Spellforce 1, it definitely defines the whole game. Sorry, I forgot to mention it. As you produce units, your rune power percentage lowers, which means further units are produced slower, right? So you have to kind of like recover at some point, or your units will be produced very, very slowly. So that's another very important element. All of this increases the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics. The fact that you have split worker PopCap from military PopCap is higher abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics. Rune power increases the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics in terms of the production speed of your monument. And now you must be wondering, well, Eraser, but do all of the buildings in this game are subjected to these rules? No. And that is precisely the defining element of the gameplay mechanics in this game. One of them, pretty much. The split PopCap, the rune power, and the monument is like the base. And the element that I'm going to mention, which is the shared production queue. Normally, in RTS games, as we all know, we create the barracks, generally, and from the barracks, we produce the units. They have different naming conventions. Not all of them will be called barracks. But in this game, all of the civilizations behave like the Zerg in StarCraft 2. That's a shared feature among all of them. The queue is unified. It produces both the worker units and the military units. The barracks, except for one exception, which is the large headquarters producing the Titan, except for that single exception, which is common for all races. That's why I said that they are not as asymmetrical as in StarCraft 2, for example, or Warcraft. Here, they all behave like the Zerg. It has a unified production queue. The game has a unified production queue across all 6 races. In that building that I have been showing to you so much, that I have been paying so much attention in the analysis, the monument. So, and that leads me to another element, which is the rune board. Your hero unit will have a rune board with gems. the gems will include, they can be of different levels, first of all, from 1 to 15, and they can include the worker rune, which is one for each of the 6 races of the campaign: human, elf, dwarf, orc, troll, dark elf. Pretty much you have 6 worker runes by the end of the game. Without them, you don't have access to the monument of said race. Monuments are buildings like that, like there you could see a troll monument. They are fixed buildings that you don't create. They are kind of like at fixed positions of each of the maps of the scenarios of the campaign. You get to them and you use your rune, your worker rune of any of the 6 races, to activate the monument. Once you activate the monument, you can start producing worker units and, well, not military units immediately, but then after some buildings, after creating some other buildings, you can create pretty much the other military units, basically. So you need to loot once again those worker runes, and it also has hero runes for another building called the Hero Monument that you saw previously, that basically allows you to summon the other 5 hero units that will accompany you throughout the campaign. But well, there you have it. The monument, there you can see it produces workers. There you can see the worker with, there you can see that I'm producing a military unit and a worker at the same time. There you can see that perfectly. It's the same for all races. They are the same in that sense. They share that mechanic. Now, that has a lot of implications. And there you can, and here you will see the correlation. It can take you, because of the stat system of the game, it can take you 2 hours easily to just get a foothold. On any scenario of the campaign. To get a foothold, to just create the most basic base, the most, the early game gameplay mechanics base, undeveloped base, pretty much. It can take you 2 hours just with your hero unit that potentially can be easily ruined by the stat system of the game, as I explained previously. Now, on top of that, afterwards, because of the fact that the production queue is unified, I have several reasons. Because of the resource dispersion, you need to gather different resources. Because of the fact that not all attacks land on units, that the game features evasion as a stat, in which not all of your attacks land. Because of the fact that in this game there are very, very few siege units, effective units against buildings. I think I only saw 2. Because of all of these myriad of reasons, the RTS portion of the gameplay mechanics is also quite slow. It's quite slow. Both the RPG portion, because of how the stat system is handled with min-maxing in mind, and because of the fact that also they are not properly balanced, the enemy units, because sometimes it can take you, just as I've said, 2 hours to get to the main base. Because of that, the RPG portion is slow, and the RTS portion is also slow. Now, I want this to be crystal clear. Slowness by itself is not bad. Age of Empires 2 is slow. definitely. It's definitely slow. But the problem is, once again, that the proportion in how you reward the player for their macromanagement and micromanagement is properly implemented. See, that's why I told you to remember that, because the game is slow. Slowness by itself is not bad. Slowness by itself, however, does influence and make it worse the final product, that is Spellforce 1, because of the improperly balanced macro and micromanagement reward system. Imagine that is, and I know this is very, very abstract, people, but imagine this. Imagine that I create a stat system in which the hero unit can have such a build that breaks through the limitations of the paradigm of min-maxing as the framework of the stat system. By that I mean that evenly distributing stats is more efficient in combat, right? I don't know. There are different ideas that they could have implemented. For example, you only get combat abilities if you spend points on a specific specialization of your weapon, which I didn't do at the beginning. Because I wanted to use a long blade, which was a very difficult to find one-handed weapon that wasn't a short weapon, naturally, considered like that. And because of that, I didn't have access to the weapon system of the game. And because of that, the direct consequence is that you are rewarding macromanagement much more. You are not properly rewarding micromanagement, because even if I have perfect positioning on the battlefield, perfect everything, the RPG portion, which is how I created it, pretty much the stat system, the moment I decided not to min-max, and I do this on purpose to see if they fix this, how they not if they fix it, how they accounted for the min-maxing framework of the stat system. Pretty much, if you don't min-max, the micromanagement portion of the gameplay mechanics is not properly rewarded. Then, as I've said, as you create your base, it's still extremely slow, because you will be constantly attacked by 10 bases, 7 bases of enemy units that will activate their production. The production is that small light that you've been seeing in their bases, that small flow of light from the ground that you see in all of their bases. It activates as soon as you activate the worker rune that you saw, that you heard me mention some minutes ago. As you activate your base, their bases also start producing units and sending them your way, first with the scouts, and if your hero unit alone, and again this is why micromanagement is developed in a very questionable way in this game. If you cannot fend off that initial wave of scouts, then the whole might of 7 or 10 bases will utterly destroy your base with a 100% of success, because 100% chance of success, because you didn't even have time to develop your base by then. That is a huge lack of balance that this game has. Now, I always mention this to you people. Difficulty by itself is positive, because it enhances the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics, indeed. 100%. It is positive by itself, and I applaud the decision of the developers to ensure that you are constantly on your toes. That's definitely positive, that they send the units. But the scout mechanic could have been easily replaced with, let's say, a lockdown period in which the enemy won't attack you, or even better, because that's a very artificial solution, just giving the player, I don't know, 10 minutes to develop the base before they start attacking, in case the hero unit cannot dispatch the initial scout unit that the 7 or 10 bases will send to your location. In case that's the thing, the perfect solution, and this is related to the level design, would have been to have the key of this analysis, the objective, a proper objective variety, instead of being a succession of skirmishes, which leads me to the next point of the analysis, which is the level design at this point. I also wanted to mention that you have respawn points, and eventually, if all of your base is destroyed, you are sent to the previous level of the campaign, which is a great achievement that this game does, which is the fact that you can go back to the previous level of the campaign. Generally in RTS games, they are just maps are individual files that you load completely separately. But in this case, in the case of this game, a great idea that they had is to connect the game world with those portals that you've been looking at for quite some time. Well, here I'm also there you can see my inventory. I think I covered everything. Yeah, the spellbook. Well, pretty much this is also part of the thing. Part of the item system of the game and its relationship with the stat system. Because according to the branches of the skill tree that you choose, for example, the piercing weapons, you get different abilities in something called the spellbook. You can add spells basically that you can cast, and according to your proficiency, pretty much you can use different spells. And for example, I could only use. I only discovered that you can use an ability called Berserk, which greatly increases your melee damage in the last level of the campaign. That shows you how terribly balanced the game is, also in its skill tree system in that sense. So yeah, there you can see that by the end of the game, this is pretty much the end of the game, what you're looking at. I could equip a proper poison dagger to my character that pretty much replaced or complemented the low strength that it has. There you can see that you also have armor class for resisting the blows and etc. And special weapons. There you see that I mentioned them, and I think I covered everything, because we have the building plans, the building plans, the units, the unit plans, the spells. You can also sell your items. There you can see that I have 28 pages of items. Another positive thing is that the inventory is endless. That's very surprising for a game from this generation. And I also have the quest log there, the quest book. And then you can also loot diamonds and gems to get extra money that, as you can see, you don't need. But well, look at those portals. That portal that you see there, that they connect the whole game world, and that's a very, very nice touch that they did there. It's quite good. So here you will have the perfect example, the beginning of another level. As I talk about the level design, you will see how tedious it can be. Like this almost 2 hours here will be spent just getting a foothold, as you will see. And I don't think I even get a foothold in this case. So there you can see how a level starts. You've been looking at how a level ends for the gameplay mechanics. Now you'll see how a level starts. And this that I'm showing to you is pretty much the same for all of the scenarios of the campaign, which leads me to the level design. There you can see the spells that I can use. You'll see me using them. And the experience bar. Another thing that I don't like about the user interface is that the health and the mana bars are way too thin, and they don't have the exact percentages and points, which would have easily helped in terms of the gameplay mechanics. Okay, as you look at this at the beginning of this level, you'll see that it will take me 2 hours to cover to even get a foothold. You'll see how tedious it is. You'll see. I'll leave it like this just so you see how tedious it is. You just saw the good, let's say the best part of the gameplay mechanics. Now you will see the worst, because you'll see how slow it is after the cinematic with this guy. Alright, but as for the analysis, people, let's get into the second category. Here, let me refresh you for a second, because I covered everything about the gameplay mechanics. I've analyzed it from every angle. If you want a quick conclusion, pretty much the gameplay mechanics are properly implemented. They expand upon the formula of Warcraft 3 a lot, very well executed, very high abstract complexity, very well done. The integration of the RPG, the efficiency of the integration of the RPG portion in the gameplay mechanics is properly done. The problem is once again the influence of that integration of the RPG portion on the level design, precisely, and that's the core of the issue with this game. So let's get into the second category of the analysis. Which is the technical portion of it, and also I will go straight to the level design because it's the main part of it. The technical aspect is not that predominantly important as the others. Okay, so let's start with the technical aspect so we get it out of the way. The game doesn't run natively at 1080p as you are looking at here. What you are looking at is a modded executable that I have been showing. For this game, in which, at the cost of a vertex explosion in the background, sometimes in cinematics, the game runs at 1080p at least. That's why you see that it's good. The game doesn't run natively at 1080p even by now, and before you think is well, but it's a very old game. Yes, I take that in the context of it being an old game. For example, Warcraft 3 and Warcraft 3 does run at unlocked resolutions, and not only that, the effects and everything, it is impressive because by the time this game was released, this campaign was released 2001. 3D graphics, they had already been developed, but they were kind of like, they had a much worse anti-aliasing, much worse. It would be like the PS1 similarly, but by now we had the PS2, right? Yeah, we had the PS2 by then. It would be considered it's the very beginning. It's tricky because it's the very beginning of the 6th generation and the ending of the 5th generation. It's pretty much in between the two. It's like the very start of the 6th generation. So even so, the game has some good special effects. Nothing crazy like Sacred 2, like Sacred 2 plays with the physics, with the NVIDIA physics engine of the game. It has some crazy particle effects. I don't like that they reuse a lot of the effects. For example, that spell that you see down there, the one to the right, to the far right of the screen, That one basically it's an area of effect kill for enemies that have low health, and it has the same animation as the base, as the enemy base when it's producing units. The very same animation, pretty much. A spell has the same animation as the other one, so there's a bit of recycling. The animation for the extra melee damage, and the healing, it's the same. There's a lot of recycling. And I would also add that the most impressive part of the graphics of the game is how the day-night cycle affects the lighting of your base. You could see it previously that when it was night, when we were in kind of like the night period of the gameplay mechanics, all of the lights of the troll base illuminated. I don't know if you paid attention to that. In this case, the enemy bases don't illuminate. There you can see that there's no light there in the center with indicating unit production of them. So yeah, pretty much. There you can see that it's the same that animation that you see, that's the one that I'm talking about. The yellow circle, the animated yellow circle spinning around my units, that indicates the use of Warcraft, which is increased melee damage, but it also indicates the use of healing. There you can see that there's a poison unit. Here you'll see how tedious it is. Remember, this is the beginning of a level. I see how I have to restart it. Pretty much the graphical aspect of the game for 2001. On one hand, it's impressive that it's 3D. And you are looking at it at such a high resolution because of the mod, just like way I did with the Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard. There you can see the aura, for example, the animation of the aura. There's the aura of weakness that reduces enemy damage. Well, there you can see it's just me against a basic base and a Kithar base of Catmen warriors. There you can see that that is impossible to take that base like this. See how the game forces you to do this. There I have blessing, for example, it restores all of my health. But well, the animation of the aura is the same for this one, and the warlock that you saw in the previous level. Is the same for all of them. So they recycled the aura animations. They recycled the spell animations. They recycled even the spawn, the spawn production animation shared with some of the abilities, because as I've said, one of them is shared. That ray of lightning that you saw with the particle effects on the ground. So yes. There you can see how I respawn at the resurrection stone. And yes, indeed, as you can see, they recycled a lot of the effects. The resolution is not unlocked; it's capped at 1080p. And before you say something, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard, because as I said, a fair comparison is, in the context of the contemporary quality of 2001 that this game had, for example. So a lot of games from that generation, while they didn't run natively at unlocked resolutions, through modding you can unlock it. In this game, no. 1080p is like a hard cap before you start breaking things. So natively, I think the limit was 1000 or so resolution by 800, something like that. So yes, in terms of the graphical quality, not only the resolution, but we have recycling of effects. We have a lot of low resolution textures, which, I mean, for the time it was understandable, but even so, as I've said, a lot of games had better textures, better non-recycled graphical effects, and better, of course, frame rates. Now, I think the frame rate here, it also has a problem, this game, and I'm mentioning this because it's part of a technical aspect. Now you must be thinking about the frame rate. The frame rate is unlocked, but with the mod that makes it run at 1080p, at least, it can crash if you Alt-Tab. The game can crash if you Alt-Tab, in that sense, so it's not the best technical portion, it's not the best technical state ever. It's not the best ever. So it is good for 2001. Good. It's good because it's in 3D. And it was pretty much the beginning of the 6th generation. The very, very beginning. Very, very beginning. I would say it's right between 5th and 6th generation. Of course, thanks to PC motors, we can have it run at 1080p. But it causes, even so, that causes a vertex explosion that you can that you have been watching in the cinematics that we've been playing, when there's kind of like that black circle exploding in the sky, because in this game you can even play it with a third-person perspective that is not very useful at all. You will always use the isometric camera. There you can see how many times I have to repeat this shit. See how many times I have to repeat this shit? See how I'm locked in an endless loop there? Get good, you idiot. No, it's not a matter of that. It's a matter of how the game handles that, because if I don't take out all of those bases, then I will be overwhelmed instantly. See that they are not producing units, but as soon as I put the rune, the worker rune, as I activate the worker rune, they will all explode, sending units my way. Okay. So in terms of the technical aspect of the game, you can see it. It's good because it's in 3D for 2001, which is the very beginning of the 6th generation of the PS2, just so you have an idea. The PS2, pretty much Dreamcast. So while it doesn't run natively, you can get it to run up to 1080p, and the frame rate is unlocked. That's a positive one. That's a positive one. The frame rate is unlocked, but you cannot Alt-Tab, for example. You cannot Alt-Tab. I think it doesn't have windowed mode, so it's right there. It's kind of like understandable for the context in which the game was developed in. That's the ending of the 5th generation, beginning of the 6th generation. But still, I have seen better contemporary examples. Pretty much. Pretty much. Needless to say, Warcraft 3, well, it's Warcraft 3, pretty much. It has adapted perfectly. Armies of Exegol has a 1080p cap. It has a 1080p cap, but it has much better effects, and it doesn't break as you Alt-Tab. But well, that one is 2003. So it's a bit worse. Praetorians would be another example that has pretty good effects. You have the HD version. Well, but it's a remastered. Yeah, but when they remastered it, they didn't cause vertex explosions. The same has vertex explosions as you upscale the resolution with the mod. Oh well, it's a good technical aspect because it has unlocked frame rates. It's in 3D for 2001, which is a lot. It has an interconnected world, which is, well, it's not all loaded at the same time, but still, it's well done. It's not perfect, the technical aspect, but it's decent. Let's say it's an average case. There you can see that I could take out one Kithar warrior, and now I'm gonna die. So as I respawn, let's get into the most important category of this analysis, the key, the biggest flaw, the level design. Because as I've said, the gameplay, if I had to mention an outcome, the gameplay, the core gameplay mechanics if I had to mention an outcome exclusively, if I had to qualify this game exclusively for the gameplay mechanics, trust me, the qualification would be extremely high. It would be quite high. Maybe not a perfect 10, because, for example, you cannot assign control groups to buildings, and sometimes your mages, your ranged units that use magic, will engage in melee if you don't continuously press H, so before depleting all of their mana. So it has some control issues in that sense. I mentioned this with Battle Realms Winter of the Wolf at the beginning. Precisely, the developer of that RTS mentioned to me that then they switched back to a more classic approach with War of the Ring and Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard. That was indeed much more effective. So indeed, this game feels quite similar to Battle Realms Winter of the Wolf in that sense. It feels pretty similar in terms of those control units. But well, if I had to qualify the game exclusively for the gameplay mechanics, it would be high because of the abstract complexity of the RPG mechanics and the efficiency of the integration with the real-time strategy portion of it. Even if I would take into account the unbalanced reward system with the initial part that I mentioned in the gameplay category of the analysis when you get into the early game gameplay mechanics, which is precisely this, which leads me to the level design, which leads me to the biggest flaw of the game, as you can see here. It can take 2 hours to attack enemy bases and kill them like this, so you offload the amount of units that are going to attack your base immediately as you activate the worker rune. Okay, the biggest flaw of the level design, besides all of the connections that I mentioned in the gameplay category of the analysis, besides all of that, there you can see me dying again with a very good build, because I could finish the game at the end of the day with the very same build. The main flaw of the game, in the framework of the level design, the huge problem, the big element that would have made this game have a very high score, not a perfect one, but a very high score, had it accounted for it. What element is it, people? The one that I have been mentioning if you watched the streams or as a YouTube VOD in the future, the lack of objective variety. The lack of objective variety. The absolute, utter, terrible, disgusting, brutal. I don't know how they didn't take this into account, considering the abstract complexity of the core gameplay mechanics. The objective variety. The lack of objective variety. Establishing a direct comparison with another game called Heroes of Unhealthy Empires that I bashed a lot, that I criticized a lot when analyzing it, for the very same reason, and I hoped this game would be different, and I hope this game would implement a different strategy. Let's establish a comparison. The campaign in Heroes of Annihilated Empires, it's a succession of baseless exploration missions. Out of 14 missions of the campaign, only 2 had base building. The proportion between RPG and RTS was a mess. Straight up. You only played with your hero unit. No base building. No base building at all. Critical flaw. Terrible Heroes of Annihilated Empires regarding that. Let's get into Spellforce. Spellforce does include base building. It does include expanded RPG mechanics, as we've been mentioning. But the problem that negatively impacts, like it ricochets to all other aspects of the analysis. It bounces to all other aspects of the analysis that will make you forget when playing this game, and that's why I recommend you don't play it. That will destroy every virtue that the game has. The campaign is very long. It's double, more than double that of Heroes of Annihilate Empires in length. And it's a succession of skirmishes. The level design of this game is a succession of skirmishes. As I will say once again, slowness, repetitiveness in this case, aren't negative by themselves. But the repetitiveness of playing a campaign that is as long as Warcraft 3, in which the objective variety is a succession of skirmishes, completely destroys the objective abstract complexity of the level design of this game and negatively impacts, as I've said, the gameplay, the core gameplay mechanics of the game. It impacts everything, even the storyline, because by the time you finish this game, you forget about the initial characters. Because of the insane amount of time you'll have to spend reloading, there you can see the effect. That's the same effect as the other one. That indicates that the base is no longer producing units. You have to do that because otherwise you are overwhelmed at the beginning, in the early stages of your base building. Okay, so let's do a fair and objective comparison. Is it better than the solution of Heroes of Annihilate Empires of directly stripping the level design of the base building component of it? Yes, it's better. A succession of skirmishes is objectively better than eliminating 50% of the gameplay mechanics for who knows whatever reason. Destroying the level design of Heroes of Annihilate Empires in that case. Is it a better solution? Yes. Is it a better solution by a huge margin? No. Is it a huge improvement by a huge margin? Definitely no. Repetitiveness, once again, objectively speaking, repetitiveness isn't bad by itself. Diablo is repetitive, the isometric action RPG genre in general is repetitive, the RTS genre is not only repetitive but mechanical, because you have to memorize the base building. It's even worse. It has a high entry bar in that sense. So yes, it's an improvement, but by a thin margin. If on top of that we add, because Heroes of Annihilate Empires had a terrible level design, it's a succession of baseless exploration missions, and this game is a succession of skirmishes, no objective variety at all, no escort missions, no tower defense missions, no 30-minute defense missions like in Armies of Exegol and Warcraft and StarCraft. For example, the end of the Terran campaign in StarCraft 2 and StarCraft 1, pretty much all of that. The ending of Legacy of the Void, they are all kind of like defending your 3 bases for 30 minutes, pretty much. Getting to a specific part of the map using. I remember that in Armies of Exegol there was a baseless exploration mission. Let's say that this game has a bit of baseless exploration at the beginning of the level, but it's always the same. As I've said, repetitiveness by itself is not bad, even in the RTS genre. The thing is that all of the games that I have been mentioned that are perfect with a perfect proportion of macro and micromanagement, reward, punishment system, and everything. StarCraft 2. Think about StarCraft 2. Think about Warcraft 3. Think about Age of Empires 2. Age of Empires 1 suffers from this in a very, very much lower proportion. They didn't have such a glaring implementation of this mistake, or not an implementation, that they a reproduction of this mistake. But Age of Empires 1 does have it. It feels similar to a succession of skirmishes. We could say that in the context of 2001, this was the development logic. The problem is that Warcraft 3 exists. The problem is that Warcraft 3 exists. And it's the complete opposite of this. So Warcraft 3 had to come around and fix this precisely. So the game is a succession of this game is a succession of skirmishes. This is the reason I say that you don't play it. All of the levels are the same. What I'm going to describe fits all of the levels. You start bases exploration. Bravely, you have to try to take as many bases as you can. Then develop your base, hope that you survive, and then take the rest of the map. There are some bosses, some outliers, but still some special cases that are positive. But the level design is a succession of skirmishes. All of the levels are getting to the level, kill, destroy the bases. In StarCraft, in Warcraft, in Age of Empires, no. In Age of Empires 2, no. Age of Empires 2 even has a lot of amazing variety for the French, for the classic French campaign, for all of them, taking a very well defended fortress, different lack of resources, etc. How they play with all of the elements of the level design, but pretty much the objective variety, escort missions, keeping your hero unit alive. I don't know. In Warcraft 3, let's not even talk about Warcraft 3. Warcraft 3 is pretty much perfection in terms of objective variety. You have not a single mission in Warcraft 3 feels the same as the previous one, even if the level design philosophy is the same. Even if it ends up as a skirmish, they all feel extremely different. In this game, all of the levels feel the same. No objective variety. That's a critical flaw. Just like it was with Heroes of Anarchy Empires. Is it the best solution, objectively, than eliminating 50% of the gameplay mechanics and doing the same? Yes. Yes. At least here, they account for the base building aspect, so it's a bit better than Heroes of Anarchy Empires, the level design being fair, but still a far cry from fixing the problem that these RTS and RPG crossovers have been suffering. We need to review specifically the analysis of Armies of Exigo, because I was a bit harsh on that one in that case, because in the context of the comparison I hadn't played this one and some other more obscure cases, and in that sense Armies of Exigo has the closest objective variety to Warcraft 3 that I've seen. So it's a much better game in the context of 2003, in that case, of the RTS genre. But yes, it objectively still had some it still suffered from some lack of objective variety. Still suffered from it. The only ones that properly solved it are the kings of the genre, and that's why they were so successful in their campaigns. It's a shame that it is something. I know that it's very difficult for RTS developers because it's a complex genre, but still, objective variety, you have to get it right. You have to get it right. Objective variety is something that you cannot miss. Here, I feel that they properly implemented the gameplay mechanics. See how much time it's taking me just to take the base. And I have high evasion rating not to die. But well, here you can see the level design. It's always the same. See how repetitive, how tedious and arduous it is to just develop your main base on any map. If on top of that we add that this game also involves, it has a forced backtracking by the end of the campaign, roughly by, let's say, 70% of the campaign. It has a backtracking moment in which you have to to go to two different levels, one of them being the rift of demons, precisely as I labeled it. That is very frustrating. You have to do a lot of backtracking to gather the fragments of the artwork in exchange for the Phoenix Stone. So it has a hard cap like the ending of Metroid Prime 1, in which you have to go back and backtrack. And on top of that, there's also this level precisely that you are looking at right now, that I will play the other recording, in which by the end of it, the enemy units are there's a structure in which you have to guide that tree that you saw at the beginning, that talking tree that you saw at the beginning, to destroy the towers, because your units otherwise are automatically killed. All of that done on purpose to artificially extend the length of the campaign, but making it even more tedious by making it even longer. You have to, for example, backtrack to a previous level and kill a random dragon that is hidden on the map, to just get through that specific level, in which you have to get the Phoenix, to get the Phoenix Stone, to get the fragments of the artwork in exchange for the Phoenix Stone. And on top of that, there are two more elements that make it even more tedious in terms of the level design. That when you reload, the fog of war is reset for no apparent purpose, because anyways the player can memorize the spot, so the fog of war is reset. And second, when you go back, it could happen, as you progress through the game, it could happen that you miss the building plans, forcing you to backtrack. You also have to backtrack to level up your unit, because of that influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, that is so terrible in this case, how it negatively impacts it. The degree of negative impact that it has, it's absolutely brutal. See, for example, that base, I cannot take it. It's much more densely populated. It impacts the gameplay mechanics terribly. Why? Because you have to level up your unit to a bare minimum, so you can get a foothold on in all of these skirmishes, in all of these skirmish maps that compose, that the campaign is composed of. Basically, it's basically a succession of skirmishes. So you are forced to backtrack. The fog of war is reset. You have to level up to a minimum amount. See how much time it's taking me to get to create a base, the initial base. In this case, see how much time it's taking me. Okay. Because of all of this, because of how afterwards the gameplay mechanics force you to play slow, each level of the campaign can take you easily 4 hours. 4 hours easily, and I skipped a lot, and I didn't do side quests, and I didn't do a lot of things, and I didn't farm, I didn't level up a lot. I think only one level is a result of direct farming, which I did off stream from level 23 to 24 in the Demon Rift level, precisely because otherwise it was impossible. And you get immediately attacked there, pretty much. So you can skip building plans that are, this is a grave mistake as well, which are sometimes hidden by trees because of the fact that you can rotate the camera in this game. I haven't done it here in the gameplay footage that you are watching, but I did it throughout the campaign. You can rotate the camera, but the placement of the chests that contain specifically the unit plans that can cause a huge mess to you in later levels, something as crucial as that, instead of placing it in the center of the camera focus from the default perspective that you see down there in the minimap, There you can see in the minimap how the camera is it's showing you the terrain from a specific angle. In the dwarf, by the time you discover the dwarf civilization, and by the time you discover the orc civilization, there are 2 spots in which the default camera angle perfectly hides the chests that contain crucial buildings, important buildings that will allow you to play the game with the advanced dwarf units. It's the ending of the dwarf section of the campaign and the beginning of the orc campaign. I also skipped the orc campaign. So now you must be thinking, well, that's because you're an idiot. You skipped them. It's on your fault. It's on your part. I would generally take responsibility for it if it weren't for the fact that when I googled it, I found dozens of posts of people online mentioning the same thing. The average does not confirm the rule, Eraser. It could be that all of the people who play the game are idiots like you. Even if you use that argument, objectively, from the perspective, there you can see that I'm rotating the camera, from the perspective of the default camera angle, which is the one that a developer as a whole has to expect the user to use by default. This is part of software development as a whole, of considering all of the options that when you are, for example, designing a web page, you have to consider all of the options that the customer is going to pretty much do, all of the actions that it's going to do, and how it will affect the underlying data, and how you have to cover all of the probabilities. In this game, the main probability, see how we can get to the metaphysically objective reality of it. The default camera angle that they chose, the default one, which is what they should have expected the player, because they created it as a default camera angle to use for most of the time. That default camera angle is the one that perfectly hides the chests that I have been mentioning about the dwarf civilization and the orc civilization, that you can skip easily because there's a tree in front of them from the perspective of the default camera angle, which is the one that they expected the player to use for most of the time, because that's a very objective definition of default camera angle. It perfectly hides the chest, and the chest is placed in a base that is in between enemy bases. So in the middle of a fight, with the default camera angle pointing at the chest of the advanced dwarf building plans, is completely blocked from sight. You can watch it in the in the previous boss. When I do the backtracking, I show it by the end of a boss. It's perfectly hidden. The same for the orc buildings. There's a tree perfectly hiding it. Okay, that is a level design mistake. Objectively, people, it's perfectly hidden from the default camera angle. It could have been easily solved. Now, that stupid element that you must be thinking, Razor, but the fact that it's being visually blocked, a chest with some base building plans, what consequences does it have? That's the problem. Because of the relationship of the gameplay mechanics and the level design, if you don't have the base building plans, you cannot create the buildings required to create the advanced units, and because of that you are inefficient in combat, and pretty much it's impossible to progress. in a lot of cases. Because of that, it can make the game even harder than it already is, which is a lot for modern standards in a relative analysis for the average player. It can make it even harder. It can make it even harder, people, because it happened to me in one of these scenarios until I realized that there was something wrong. I went on to the next level without the advanced dwarf units, and because of that I had to use only basic units in the ending of the dwarf campaign in a 1v15 skirmish. Initially I thought that the level design was specifically designed like that to enhance difficulty, but no, it wasn't an intentional level design choice or philosophy or development philosophy of it at all. It is a direct consequence of a level design mistake, which is negatively impacting, in that case, the technical aspect of the game, which is the graphics, basically. A tree blocking your sight from the default camera angle again. That's why there's a lot of people asking in forums from all of the years that you can imagine, from any period. From 2017, I found the solution. From 2008, from 2010, from 2005, I found from all of the years the same question. The pattern of the problem with the level design is universal in that case, is objectively and properly done in that case. Okay, so it has a lot of negative consequences, as I've said. In the next level, I played only with a basic unit. I could only produce the basic unit. Because of that, I could only produce the basic unit, and it took me literally 8 hours to finish that. And at some point, I wouldn't have been able to even progress through the campaign with that, because I wouldn't have been able to create to even gather the basic resources for the orc civilization. So the game forces you to actively backtrack to find both the unit plans and the build plans for the building plans and the unit plans, both of them. Because of this, because of all of the things that I've said, because of the level design problems that I've said, that because of the relationship with the gameplay mechanics, that precisely you're attacked as soon as you activate a base, I want to point out something before we get to the conclusion of the level design. The game is not hard. It's not hard by default. I'm not complaining about the difficulty, because as I've said, I appreciate the difficulty of the game and the fact that you are on your toes as you create the base. But notice this. Back when I was in the not in the God War level, in one of the final levels of the campaign, when you first fight against the Blades once they wipe out the Order and all of the storyline that we'll get into in a minute. In one of the levels, I could create a massive base, right? Just so you see that it's not difficult, that the difficulty is not properly implemented. I created a base, right? I could expand the base, hit the unit pop cap, defend against the constant attacks until I could hit the unit pop cap, and etc. But see if it's so improperly balanced, the level design, that they were ice golems. They were ice golems and blades attacking us. There you can see a building plan. There's a rune board, for example, that I have been mentioning. There you can see the worker runes. I could develop my base, right? Against ice golems and blades. I could fend off their attacks, I could defend my base. My base could survive. But eventually, I ran out of resources. See how much time is taking me here. But eventually, I ran out of resources. I created 80 units. I could hit the pop cap. But as soon as I left my base, it was inevitable. It was inevitable because I tested every possibility. I created defensive structures, a lot of them, a lot of them, enough to until I ran out of resources. I sucked the resources of half of the map, pretty much all of it, and they were constantly attacking me. And I couldn't leave my base, basically, with my units without them destroying my base. I had to choose. Either they would destroy my base, or if I left I would have had to either defend my base or send my units to destroy the enemy base, which is what I ended up doing. I had to send my units to one of the bases that were attacking me, to the ice golem bases, to take half of it, to destroy one of the spawn points. In that period of time, both the ice golems and the blades destroyed my base. I had to do it like that. I had to let them destroy my base in order for me to stop the unit production of one of the bases out of the 7 or 10 bases that were in that map. So when I would reload, and this is related to the problem of the level design, when I would enter again that level, because you can enter them again and everything will be the same, when you destroy a base, it stays like that. That's the solution that they had for the game to be so the player can even complete the game, so it's finishable. So I send all of my units to the ice golems base, and I destroyed one of them. They had two. Then they had like 4 blade bases to the south. I think it was the God plane or something like that, the level. So I destroyed that, but of course there's a problem, because when enemy units destroy all of your base, they eventually get to the monument, and the monument, when it's attacked, it loses its power. That means that all of your military units are automatically unsummoned, killed immediately. So I had to make use of them, destroy the spawn point, the production of enemy units, so I could reload the level. When your hero unit gets killed, time fast forwards and the game automatically calculates the outcome of the battle, in which you generally have a negative outcome, generally. But if they get to the hero monument of your base and they destroy it, all of your military units are unsummoned. So I made use of them until they were killed. My base was too big, so it took them a while to get to the hero monument. I got killed and I got expelled of the level, right? I got expelled of the level, all of my buildings destroyed, etc. So, how does the game fix this? Because by now, the enemy has a fully developed base, right? Has a fully developed base. You let them produce units, because you created a base, so that activated the unit production of the enemy. And the map is filled with enemy units. Yes, that can happen in this game. So, that also happened to me in the Demon Rift level. That is one of the consequences of the terrible level design of this game. So they continue producing units, you continue producing units, they continue producing units, and you have to re-enter the level with nothing, only with your hero unit. Okay, that also loses experience as it dies. So, you once again enter the level. What happens then? The map is filled with enemy units that can detect you, and it's basically a whole army against a single hero unit. You die. You are expelled again out of the level. At this point, you would think that the game is impossible to complete, as I thought several times. Because they will detect you and go straight for your base once they start unit production. After some tries, eventually, the algorithm of the game, of the artificial intelligence, didn't detect my hero unit based on no principle whatsoever other than the fact that I died several times and killed some of them, and I could kind of like go through a path in which I presume the detection range didn't work. But then afterwards, as I developed my base, they attacked me instantly with the whole army. Imagine a skirmish map in which you've already won, and you invite the player, in StarCraft 2, you invite the player, no, create your base again. Imagine, with nothing, and I already have a 200 pop cap, 200 out of 200 pop cap, already developed, an already developed base. I was killed several more times, and eventually I could get to my base, so at that point it would be brutal difficulty, so high the difficulty that it would be impossible to complete the game. It would be kind of like the highest difficulty ever created, because at that point you are letting the AI develop the whole base, and it would be kind of like real time, that the artificial intelligence has already won. It developed the base and you couldn't develop your base, and pretty much the skirmish map will continuously have the same outcome, an already developed base against only your hero unit. You could argue that you could use your hero units to destroy the unit production buildings and kill them one by one. No, because by then you will be swarmed by enemy armies, because generally this game is a 1v10 AI skirmish. Generally will be like that of the levels of the campaign. So, I destroyed one of the bases. I left the second base of the ice golems almost destroyed. I had to try several times until I could destroy it, and then I would go back to the place where the blades killed me some other insane amount of times, and after that, from 100% brutal, objectively impossible to succeed difficulty, there's no restarting in this game of the level. You are just expelled out of it, you re-enter, and you get killed again. See how much time it's taking me for this. Keep watching it, people. Keep watching it. I'll take it out. I'll remove it to stop the torture in a minute, basically, and I'll put another video. So there you have it. Going from 100% difficulty. At this point, the game is impossible to complete. It's impossible to complete because you let the AI develop a whole base with. And they swarmed you. You took out one or two bases, sacrificing your whole base and your army. You destroyed some of the bases that were producing enemy units. They are swarming you. It's impossible. You get to the monument, killed. You get to the monument, killed. Well, as I've said, because of unknown reasons, that I presume is the detection range somehow, that sometimes work and sometimes doesn't, because I tried the same actions, same circumstances, and I had the same outcome, because of the fact that they stop producing units. Once you kill some of them, you can kind of like make the artificial intelligence understand that you are trying to restart the level. It's kind of like the fail-safe that prevents the game from being impossible to complete. See how exaggerated it is. That's why there are patches online for this game that balance it, but I analyze vanilla games. I don't take into account the modding. So, I got to my base, and it went from 100 difficulty to 0. Because after that, I could develop my base all the way back to 80 pop cap, without the golem bases. I could develop it to 80 pop cap, and the blades didn't attack me at all. 0. So it went from 100% difficulty, which is impossibility to complete the game at that point. The skirmish map is filled with 200 out of 200, in this case 80 out of 80 military units, and you have no base. It's impossible. It's impossible because it goes against the very logic rules of real-time strategy of any skirmish. It goes from that to 0, not being detected by the enemy. It's a brute, artificial, and properly implemented. They had no other option, pretty much. Failsafe to prevent the game from breaking, because at that point the game would have been broken, and you can feel the game is broken if you play the vanilla version of it. It feels broken at that point, because you go from 100 difficulty, impossibility of progressing any further, to 0, not being attacked, and slowly create your base to finish the level. It happened to me now, in hindsight, looking back, at least 3 times. 3 times. So people, going from 100 difficulty to 0 is precisely absolute, utter lack of balance. It's pretty much the most brute failsafe I've seen to fix a broken level design. All of this would have been easily fixed by following classic rules of the genre with the particular aspects that this game has. If you want to prevent them from producing units and etc., good, by adding, once again, by adding objective variety instead of limiting yourself to the very narrow and brutal objective variety of it being a succession of skirmishes. People, that is the thing. That is the thing. With a better objective variety, all of the problems that I have been mentioning would have been solved. And of course, if for and then in a perfectly balanced game, they would have taken into account the fact that the player can let the AI bloom instead of rushing it, which is the case for this game. If I let the artificial intelligence bloom, it should never get out of control in any RTS game. It's these are the principles of the genre. If you let the AI bloom and you send the player back to the initial circumstances of starting again against a fully developed base, it is an evident outcome of having a broken level design. The level design is broken in this game. I have read that in later entries of it, they somehow fixed it. But a properly developed RTS game should never have an out-of-control artificial intelligence that blooms beyond the point of no return for the specific skirmish map that we are talking about. And being this game a succession of skirmishes, it exacerbates the problem. So, it will happen to you if you play the game unmodded. It will be terrible, and it's the reason why I don't recommend you play this game, at least unmodded. Maybe if you want to mod it, it will be still without objective variety. There's only the story to talk about, to take into account, which I will get to in a minute, and it's also the reason why, and it's not a reason that justifies getting through this. It doesn't justify it. All right, there you can see me taking the developing the base initially. There you can see that I'm selecting them. Those spawn points are the ones that produce the units. Basically, see how they appeared out of nowhere. They appear as you activate your monument. So what they try to do is to kind of like have them in real time, so the player never has an advantage. So the player can never catch a breath, can never have a margin of developing his base. So it's always fair for the artificial intelligence. But yes, but in the process, and as I said, that is always positive, the intentions are positive, but the objective outcome is that if that in a lot of the levels of the campaign, in order to take these spawn points by destroying the buildings as you've been watching, you will have to sacrifice your army and your base. And the problem is that when you re-enter the level, the units of the developed artificial intelligence aren't eliminated and you start again with the same conditions. They remain there, they are persistent, and it causes you the game to be impossible to complete at that point. The failsafe that they implemented is to, for a reason that is still unknown, I presume it's a detection range or something like that, eventually after a lot of retries, for some reason they don't detect you, and you can develop your base normally, and you can mount a counterattack normally with the initial conditions, confirming what I'm mentioning. All of this would have been fixed easily with proper objective variety, with a proper balance when you have to restart a level, because even if there's no restart button in this game, you have to re-enter the level, by simply eliminating the persistent units from the previous run, like a roguelike, basically. You want to make it like a roguelike. Make it like a roguelike in that sense, the level design. It would have been objectively much more balanced, much easier. It wouldn't have made an easy game, because anyways you will be detected and you will be... It's still a 1v10. It's still a 1v10. The game is not easy. But it creates such an artificial loop. The loop is so artificial and so terribly implemented that you will feel that you will go from 100 difficulty, having the map flooded with enemies from your previous run, to 0% not being detected and having time with the failsafe that I've said that they had to implement. So the game is finishable, so you can finish the game. See that these are all extreme situations that could have been easily managed. Now people, with all of these taken into account, you can see why I wanted to mention the level design. As I've said, the initial detection is extremely exaggerated with the scouts and what I mentioned in the gameplay category of the analysis. The relationship between the level design, the building plans that can fuck up your basically they can basically ruin your development of the base in the... Sorry, I'm picking I'm starting the next video. Between all of that and everything that I mentioned, how tedious and arduous the game can be, that it had a lot of fixes. The game had a lot of fixes, as I've said. Restart all of the units for the second run. If anyways my base was destroyed, you need to ensure that the player can at least finish the game if he performs correctly in the gameplay mechanics in that department. I mastered the game, but even if you master the game, you have that problem, that incorrect influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, on the technical aspect, as I've said, because of the trees from the default camera angle blocking your sight, your view of the terrain from the chest, that will affect them throughout all of the next levels, because you won't have the advanced units for the dwarves or the orcs or whatever that you skip. So because of all of that, the level design in this game is straight up broken. It's broken. A lot of the people wondering what's the terrible aspect of this game is not the gameplay. The gameplay is properly implemented. The infinite complexity of the RPG gameplay mechanics are properly implemented. If I took out the level design category of the analysis and I only analyzed the gameplay, this game would have a high qualification. It has good pathfinding. It has good it expands properly upon the formula of Warcraft 3 with the expanded inventory, with the RPG mechanics. The RTS portion of the gameplay mechanics, while slow, are properly implemented. They follow the same principles of logic throughout all of the races. They are symmetrical in that sense, but then they are asymmetrical because of the units that they produce. And it's sure I would have added some siege units to make buildings easier to destroy. In some cases, if you get to the siege units, the defensive structures are effective. They are more effective for some races. They are ineffective for some other races. It has resistances, like for example, the defensive structure for the orcs deals fire damage, and some units are resistant against fire damage. That's properly implemented. It has the concept of accuracy and evading attacks, like in a normal RPG. It has a lot of good aspects. The gameplay category of the analysis is properly implemented, if you ask me. The gameplay mechanics, they are properly implemented. The problem is, I think I left it here. The problem is when you do not take into account the consequences that it has. This video has still a bit of going when I start the base. Well, there you can see me starting the base and developing it at the beginning with the Dark Elf civilization. The gameplay mechanics are properly implemented, but the level design is terrible. It's broken. No objective variety. Nothing. A terrible, persistent army that creates the worst scene in skirmish gameplay in RTS games ever, which is starting a skirmish, because the game is a succession of skirmishes, because there's no objective variety, in which you are going 200 PopCap, or in this case 80 PopCap, against one hero unit. The worst, because that makes the game impossible to complete, to progress through. And then it goes from 100 difficulty to 0, because then they don't detect you, and you can develop your base quietly. So it's not that the game, I'm complaining because the game is hard. That is perfect. The gameplay mechanics are hard, and they are properly implemented. The problem is the impact of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, specifically regarding the early game portion of all of the skirmish matches that constitute the campaign of this game. The early game gameplay mechanics. This directly affects the early game gameplay mechanics of any map. It's designed for skirmish matches, for a single skirmish match, and then that's it. They implemented they extrapolated the philosophy of a skirmish match to the campaign of the RPG, which is unique but broken. It's broken. A reset button would have done wonders for this game. When I say reset button, it's not that the player presses a reset button. When the hero unit is expelled from the map and goes back into it, because they are all interconnected, remember? Reset the bases. Reset the bases of the enemy units, instead of making them not detecting your hero unit after the 10th try, or whatever, how the algorithm works. Okay, with all of that said, we are done with the level design. Completely broken, and the critical flaw of this. Is it better than a succession of baseless exploration missions? A succession of baseless exploration missions like Heroes of Unided Empires? Yes. Which is the other RTS RPG crossover? Yes, it's better. Because you are not eliminating 50% of the gameplay mechanics, the RTS portion of it. But still not by a huge margin. The game is still broken in the level design. Broken. At this point, I would have suggested the formula of Warcraft 3. That Armies of Exile followed with extra elements like the underground levels or Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard that followed it, with the shard rain plus the shard rain plus the underground levels and etc. Those games, Armies of Exegol and Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard, properly implemented. Heroes of Annihilate Empires and Spellforce 1, they don't properly implement that marriage of RPG and RTS gameplay mechanics appropriately because of the level design, the lack of objective variety, and all of the things that I have been mentioning. So, level design, broken. Straight up broken. Broken. Positive aspects of the level design that we can take into account. As I've said, it does keep you on your toes, so it is hard, so the extra complexity of the gameplay mechanics is influenced in that small bit appropriately in that small bit, in that small aspect, because it won't be an easy game, but I cannot recommend you play it because of the lack of objective variety of the level design. It's absolutely broken. The gameplay aspect alone, very well implemented. Perfect? No, because of the UI problems, which would be minor. The fact that you cannot assign buildings to control group units, so we have a UI problem, a control problem, and there's also a lack of upgrades and lack of siege units. Very, very few siege units. It does have 2, I think, across the 6 races I've seen it. But even if it had a bit more, they're kind of like not efficient enough, because it's only a layer of effect damage, like a trebuchet, for example, or even if it's not a siege unit, like the Protoss Templar. So, and the very, very slow gameplay mechanics shared with the unified production queue. Because of all of that, the combination of all of these aspects create a proportion in which the gameplay mechanics are extremely, extremely, excruciatingly slow. 2 hours to get a foothold in a level, 2 hours to develop a base and counterattack. And even if you do that, if you let the AI bloom, another 2 hours to restart the level and create your base again. So potentially 6 hours. It's way, way, way too much. It's way too much. And as I've said, the gameplay mechanics in general, 80% of the proportion are properly implemented, by the level design just destroys them altogether. Also affects the technical aspect with the trees, and also affects the next category, which is the Grandeur category of analysis, people. The impact of the soundtrack and the storyline on the player. Pretty much. Let's get into the Grandeur category of analysis as we approach the ending of the analysis. Let's get into the Grandeur category. As I've said, storyline and soundtrack. The game repeats the same soundtrack, battle soundtrack. This is positive, that it has a battle soundtrack as you click on the unit. I think that should be implemented in all games across all genres, that when you are fighting, epic, orchestral, or rock, or whatever music according to the tone of the game, that the soundtrack kicks in immediately as you start fighting. That's a positive aspect of the Grandeur of the soundtrack and storyline. Negative aspect, it has lack of soundtrack variety. It's always the same for all of the races. That combat music is the same. The soundtrack variety is non-existent, just like the lack of objective variety. Both of them. It has 3 combat soundtracks, pretty much. As I've said, a positive aspect is that as you click on the enemy unit, it triggers the combat soundtrack, just like in Baldur's Gate. I think that should be the standard always, even if it's the most stupid mob that you can think about, the weakest mob ever. There should always be epic combat music as you attack them. That's something that the game gets right in terms of the soundtrack. lack of objective variety once again in StarCraft, in Warcraft, in Age of Empires. You have distinctive civilization soundtracks. I think in Age of Empires 2 you didn't have them originally. I think, if I remember correctly, when I played it back then in the 90s, in the early 2000s, sorry, it was in Age of Empires 2. I think it was shared in the original version, and precisely they fixed it in the HD version. You can pick the specific soundtrack for each civilization when you start playing. The same goes for Heroes of Mythology. It also has that, but they are properly implemented. The soundtrack is nothing crazy except for some of the battle music, but as I've said, it's the same. You don't have a distinctive soundtrack for boss encounters, for example, which would have properly complemented the RPG portion of the gameplay mechanics, like in an MMORPG when you have a specific soundtracks for bosses. It is always the same. You end up feeling that the soundtrack is always the same. Lack of objective variety. A positive aspect, as I've said, is that it triggers as you engage in combat. That's good, and it will give you that small sense of epicness, but it's not enough. It's not enough as to justify a correctly developed soundtrack, for example. That's also one of the reasons I love Knights of the Old Republic and the Old Republic series in general, because for each area, for each moment of the game, you have a different soundtrack. In the case of RTS games, it's not as important, that element. I mean, you're probably thinking, Eraser, what are you saying about soundtrack in an RTS game? No, but even if I don't expect the variety of an RTS, of a fully fledged RPG game, StarCraft 2 has more soundtrack variety. Armies of Exegol has more soundtrack variety. Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard has more soundtrack variety. Age of Empires 2 doesn't have a lot of variety. Age of Empires, in that sense, is not that good in that department. But well, the quality of the gameplay mechanics far outweighed it. It doesn't make level design mistakes like this game. In the case of StarCraft, for StarCraft 1 and 2, it's magnificent. The classic Terran theme, for example, just so you Google it and listen to it. In this case, it's not that epic, it's not that much, it's pretty much a standard. And it could have had better variety. Correct. Storyline. Let's get into the storyline, and the ambience is pretty much, they try to mimic the Lord of the Rings with that end that you saw, and the races, they expanded upon that classic Dungeons and Dragons fantasy setting, and everything. They did create a proper interconnected world. The storyline is what most of the hardcore fans of this game like, which I will agree that it is very well developed compared to the average of the genre. I would say that while it doesn't reach the epicness of Warcraft 3, of the Titans of the genre, the storyline, it would be pretty much on par with Armies of Exegol and, let's say, AA, close to good, close to perfect, close to the kings of the genre. Let's say it's a champion of the genre in that sense. The storyline is well developed. It has characters that act according to their personalities, to the fantasy setting they are in. You have the order, the convocation, basically. But I'll start with the ending. If you don't want spoilers for the game, don't listen to this, because it's pretty much the redeemable quality of it. So, spoiler alert, there we go. By the end of the game, you only have 2 cinematics, pretty much standard Warcraft 3, a standard Warcraft 3 formula. One for the ending, one for the opening, pretty much. Better than Age of Empires in that sense, the cinematics, because Age of Empires 2 uses slides, static slides. It doesn't use animations. As I said, it's not the main component of an RTS game, the storyline, but still you can. Warcraft 3 proved that we can have an epic storyline, and StarCraft as well, and Age of Empires as well, even if the presentation is not as prolific. So there you can see that they send the scout and I'm defending. In the meantime, I think I perfectly exemplified the gameplay loop with this. So, in terms of the storyline, it deals with time travel, pretty standard of fashion for this era. Think of Prince of Persia in terms of the storyline in that sense. So, you are the rune warrior, you are summoned by precisely a person that you will chase, that is the main villain of the campaign, Rowan. You'll see the character as a good mage circle that will help you, and an unidentified, a mysterious red hooded villain that is trying to summon an army of of demons and etc. And in the presentation, it's basically Rowan, a circle mage, fighting against this person. Basically. So the Rune Warrior is summoned to go across the realms in a war that is very well implemented. As I've said, the context that of the Rune Warrior as basically fighting in this war against that crazy red mage that betrays you at the beginning, doesn't kill you mysteriously at the beginning of the game, and then you chase him all across the realms, and you will lose the point of the argument in the mid-game gameplay mechanics because it's way too long because of the flaws in the level design. That also, as I said, it takes you 4 to 6 hours each level, and you can have a lot of them. And basically, yes, you will lose track of the argument by the time you finish the game. And I had to go back and explain the argument to me. So you keep chasing after this villain, you meet other characters that positively act according to their personalities in that sense. That's okay. With their different tropes and things and etc. The Convocation, which is the order of mages that basically keeps order in this world. When it happened, it was a devastating event that divided the continent into several parts, and you're trying to prevent this red hooded man from creating an army of blade demons to take over the world. Okay. The storyline, while it's not bad, as I've said, you'll lose track of it by mid-game. Involves doing a lot of fetch quests in the mid-game gameplay mechanics. They are, as I've said, always fetch quests aren't bad by themselves. For example, in MMORPG games, they are properly implemented that they can be extremely fun. Because of several reasons that I explained in the Sacred 2 analysis, for example. You can have fetch quests, but with a properly implemented objective variety. For example, in an isometric action RPG like Diablo, escorting a weak target that will get killed easily properly enhances the difficulty of the gameplay mechanics, because while you can survive, the target can get killed, and a lot of people are in love right now with the Witcher 2, with the Witcher 3's formula of treating every side quest as a main quest, but that's putting the emphasis of the quality of the concept of side quests on the storyline. The side quests are good, this is the logic, because they are like the main quest in the complexity of the storyline and how well they are done. While that is a component to take into consideration, the influence of the level design in the gameplay mechanics is more important. That's why Sacred 2 and World of Warcraft do implement that appropriately, with a different focus, but appropriately. And I would even say that influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics, as I've said, escorting a weak target instead of you getting killed, is more important. The predominance of that being properly implemented is more important than the predominance of a proper storyline in the quest. That's why I say that the meaning of fetch quest is being wrongly interpreted modernly, because the quality of a side quest in general is proportional to the quality of the writing if it's close to the main story quest. And no, it should be the influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics. Okay, well, You'll do a lot of those. The game has a lot of side quests with different storylines, but the problem is that regardless of what side quest you do, the level design will always go back to the same idea of skirmish map, clear the skirmish map. 1v7, 1v5, 1v10, whatever. Same. So here we have repetitiveness and not a lot of developed storyline. Eventually you reach a point where you have to backtrack and create. There's a lot of backtracking, as I've said. That also affects the storyline, that it's going for the fragments of the piece of artwork that in exchange for the Phoenix Stone, that is then stolen from us, so we were the cause originally for the initial part of the loop, which is the red villain getting the army, the power that he required to create his army. And by the end of the game, we just saw last time that the villain gets through a portal to simply go back to the past, and he turns into the good guy of the story, called Rowan. The villain, indeed, all the way was Rowan, the guy that gets killed by the same evil guy initially in one of the levels of the campaign, right close to the beginning. Let's say 40% of the campaign, 30%, no more than that. He gets killed, the mage gets killed by the red hooded villain, who is also Rowan, who, when he becomes the evil version of him, goes back to the past. He turns into the good side version of him, creates the portals that you see, and tries to fight his evil side that was already trying to activate the convocation and do it properly the next time, so he can control the world, and that fractures the continent of EO, which is the world of Sacred 2, of Spellforce 1. Pretty much. Sorry, it's just that I love Sacred 2. It was a perfect game. So it's basically a loop. You end up knowing that it's basically a loop. that the storyline of this game is basically a loop that you cannot prevent as the Rune Warrior. If I understood it correctly, it's like that. Pretty much. Anyways, there isn't a predominance of the story element of the game. A lot of people are convinced this is masterful storytelling, and while I agree that it does have a higher complexity, it doesn't get to the quality of Warcraft 3, it doesn't get to the quality of the StarCraft 2. Objectively, those have masterful storytelling. There is no character development for the Rune Warrior in this game. You are pretty much like another pawn of the good side of Rowan. There's no character development for the Rune Warrior. You are not the protagonist in this game, and there's no character development. As I've said, the Rune Warrior cannot make any... I think you don't even make choices that affect the course of the gameplay. For example, having different scenarios of the campaign according to your moral choices. It doesn't have a moral system, just some basic choices. You know, no, it doesn't even have choices. Huh? I think there are some basic ones regarding rewards or something like that, but nothing. It doesn't have a direct connection between character development and gameplay mechanics and level design at all. Like, the Rune Warrior is kind of like a static stone in this story. It's just there to save the day from the dangers of the evil version of Rohan that the good side version of Rohan is trying to prevent. The Rune Warrior has no character development at all. It's plain dull. He's pretty much stable all across. For example, in StarCraft 2, with Raynor and everything, it's incredible character development by Metzen, I believe it was, the one responsible in that team. The same goes for Warcraft 3. Well, let's not even talk it with the sacrifice of Thrall's brother, not only the Lich King and Sylvanas, anguish and torment as undead and everything. It's pretty well. And Arthas being a mirror of pretty much being a mirror of then Star Wars 3 that was released later with Revenge of the Sith, of how Anakin turns into Darth Vader, the classic how you see the classic character development quality from going good to evil and back to evil to good, or whatever the story the writers wanted to convey. In this game, the hero of the story is Rowan, the villain of the story is Rowan, and let's not even get into other genres like RPG with Knights of the Old Republic or something like that. That would be brutal. So my problem is that it has no character development. It has no character development, people. The Rune Warrior is plain. You won't feel anything for it at all. And you could argue that, well, but MMORPGs do behave a bit like this. You are never the protagonist like that. It tries to mimic that. If you like the level design of MMORPGs, you could like the game because of how it replicates it, but still it won't have the objective variety of MMORPG games. As I've said, regardless of what you listen to, MMORPGs have a very high complexity of level design and gameplay mechanics, even if they also have fetch quests. The thing is that they are so big that they cover both ends of the spectrum, sometimes with a better solution, with a better outcome, or a worse outcome, but they still are much more complex than this game. Okay, so no character development at all. The ending is, at the end of the day, a cliffhanger for a loop for the other two campaigns of the game. I will say that the length of the campaign is a highly positive aspect because there's a lot of content. The problem is that, as I've said, the content, that quantity doesn't have the proper quality precisely required to be engaging, to create a psychological effect on the players, on the player's brain, to precisely enhance that quality, that hypothetical quality that the game could have had with the quantity. So yes, pretty much by the end of the game, you'll end up in a cliffhanger like that, and you'll verify that it's a loop. If I understood it correctly, everything that they try to convey, a lot of side quests that you will indeed forget by the end of it. The characters don't have development at all, besides Rohan and the Order being wiped out when they go to attack the enemy without waiting for the Rune Warrior, that then you realize that it's because of the order of the Rune Mage circles and etc. And you just kill some secondary villains in the process. Okay, so I will presume that they finished the story in the other two campaigns of the game, in which they stop this shitty loop somehow. Somehow they do it. I'll take that for granted. I'll take for granted that the length of the other two campaigns is similar to this one, that is more of the same with different gameplay mechanics, but that the level design structure is the same. There's no objective variety, so it's the same, exacerbating a broken level design. Okay. Besides the fact that as a player, I wanted to finish this game since a lot of weeks ago. That can tell you, and I have a high resistance to repetitive games like this one and the RTS genre, and even I think that the game is repetitive and the storyline does not justify getting through all of this. So in that sense, no character development. Besides Rohan, the Rune Warrior has no character development at all. It's just a quest solver. It's like a Deus Ex Machina, like a reason that the developers use to justify the war started by the initial character, blatantly. So the argument doesn't have proper complexity. As well, it is good at world building. It's positive as well as at world building. So this one I would say is a mixed bag in a 40-60 proportion, 60 being the negative, 40 the positive. It's not as bad as the level design, but still the storyline could have been better handled, with a bit more of character development for the Rune Warrior instead of being a secondary element of it, for example, and expanding upon some more of the storylines. For example, it never gives you context of how the destruction of the continent directly affects your character from the beginning. Then you realize as you read that, and it's an important component that you should have taken into account. It does world building, so that's positive with the continent and the fact that the portals are created by Rohan, but it always feels that Rohan and the Rune Warrior, they are both there just to complement a world building that could have been better expanded upon by, I don't know, including texts that would tell you how the continent was before this. Like, before the Convocation, you know nothing about it. It's just Convocation, the continent is split into different parts, and Rohan. And then it's Rohan, the evil red hooded guy, and etc., and just progressing through it. So pretty much people, that's it for the Grandeur category of the analysis. As I've said, much better a much better soundtrack variety would have also helped, much better. And of course, this all complemented by the graphical effects that are also heavily recycled. Well, there you could see how much time it took me to develop a base and attack and take it. Now I'll show you as I take the base. I believe this will, as we get into the final part of the analysis, the innovation category of it. In the case of this game, the innovation category of the analysis, how much it contributes to redefine the gameplay mechanics of the genre it belongs to, as we did, just like we did at the beginning. Remember that at the beginning we talked about the genre classification, that is a vital part of any analysis, because otherwise you cannot properly analyze, you cannot properly ponder and take into account take into consideration the different elements of it. It's an RTS game, so how does it redefine the RTS genre? Well, it has a lot of original ideas. The unified queue, production queue, before StarCraft 2, for example, the broken level design of the positive the very small positive aspect, which is the fact that you'll be on your toes because of the fact that as soon as you take a base, the enemy bases produce units. The expanded RPG system of the gameplay mechanics, the very well developed gameplay portion of it, as I mentioned at the beginning, having a good degree of efficiency in the integration of the RPG mechanics and the RTS mechanics, which is what the game sets out to do initially. That is properly achieved. The problem is, and this is one more element that I wanted to include here, which, because it's part of the innovation, because it's extremely unusual to see it, a game in which, an RTS game in which you have an asymmetrical economic relationship in the gameplay mechanics and the gameplay design. No, no, not in the gameplay, in the level design. An asymmetric economic relationship between you, the player, and the artificial intelligence in terms of the level design. As I've said, before you take a base, the enemy does not produce units. As soon as you take a base, the enemy produces units. But how does it calculate it if the enemy is not gathering resources? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that across all of the streams? Look at this base. They are not, or any of the bases for that matter, they do not gather resources. How an enemy base develops in this game has nothing to do with how you as a player develop it. That indicates an asymmetric relationship of the economic system of the game and an asymmetric influence on the gameplay, on the level design aspect of it, not the gameplay mechanics. So all of these would have all been easily solved, all of the level design issues would have been easily solved if you simply tied the economic rules for unit production for enemies to the general original gameplay mechanics that you will give to the player in a normal skirmish map, or in this case the campaign, because it's a succession of skirmishes. Basically, if you get what I mean, people, maybe with less abstract words. In this game, you get to the monument, you activate it, right? You start developing your base. What determines the amount of enemy units that you face once you have already dealt with the scouts that they've already detected you? What determines it? You don't know. You will never know. It's an internal algorithm of the game that determines the economy of enemy bases in the skirmish match. That is, this campaign is a succession of skirmish matches. Basically, you don't know. They don't gather resources. It's asymmetric. It's kind of like manually done by the developers by some kind of internal algorithm that the game has. That's why you have the mechanic of the scout that tries to detect your base and you kill it. And they don't send units that way, but they are still producing them. But what's the rate of that production? There isn't an asymmetric relationship. You cannot see, as a player that has to secure resources and build your army, you cannot explain what causes, for example, those 4 Kithar warriors up there attacking my base. They appear out of nowhere. They appear out of those bases. But you don't know, you cannot measure the resource collection of the AI in this game. It appears out of nowhere. It's automatically calculated by who knows what in internal algorithm of the game, making it very similar to a tower defense in that sense, in the early game gameplay mechanics as you develop your base. Kind of like in a tower defense game, that's a huge difference between a tower defense game and an RTS, besides being no base building, though you can have some defensive structures, but you don't have base building and you don't have a fully fledged economic system controlling units at all. In this game, the AI, the artificial intelligence, feels like a tower defense game. Because it is like a tower defense game, because there is an asymmetric economic relationship between the development of the player base and the enemy bases. They are kind of like separated from the economic system, from the economic rules precisely, that the player is tied to. That asymmetric relationship, it indicates lack of, potentially because of development time, lack of complexity in creating a symmetric economic relationship that the player can see and verify between the enemy AI and the player developing a base. That has a lot of consequences, like not knowing what you're doing wrong as a player if you are not performing appropriately, efficiently in combat. So basically that the asymmetric economic relationship between the player and the artificial intelligence is also a huge problem that the game does not address. In the case of Heroes of Anarchy Empires, you straight up, if you don't have base building, you straight up don't have this problem, because basically the enemy doesn't have bases except for 2 levels of the campaign. But in those 2 levels of the campaign that Heroes of Anarchy Empires did it, they were you could see how they were gathering resources. Here they are not gathering resources. Needless to say, in StarCraft 2, in Warcraft 3, and in Age of Empires, you can see how the enemy gathers resources. There's a symmetric relationship between the economic capabilities of the AI and your base. Here they appear out of nowhere as soon as you activate the monument. So I wanted to highlight that. Any other innovation is the fact that, as I said, the marriage of RTS and RPG mechanics, that you can talk to characters and everything. I think this game did it a bit before Warcraft 3, or at least the same year, so we can attribute them simultaneously for having kind of like the characters and the dialogue lines and everything. The item system, the high complexity of the RPG system that I've already praised. As I've said, all of the things that I praised that are quite positive. And in terms of new mechanics, the fact that the world is interconnected and you can go back, but it ends up negatively affecting the level design because of how they designed it, because of all of the explained reasons previously. Because of all of that, and there's not many other things to analyze. The game is not as huge as, of course, Sacred 2, as of course, huge titans of the genre of RPG or RTS or the RTS genre. It is very lengthy. So I think I covered all of the original ideas that it had. The unified queue production, as I've said, the rune power, the percentage of rune power is also quite positive. So it has a lot of innovation. In that sense, the innovation and the gameplay do have abundance. It has a properly implemented gameplay system, and it makes a huge effort to redefine the genre. The problem is that the execution is not good at all because of the level design, and the influence in the proportion of the efficiency of the integration of the level design in the rest of the elements that we are analyzing about this game. It has a lot of great ideas, so the innovation, I would say, it's high. It tried a lot of new things, that is undeniable. The game tried a lot of new things. The problem is the efficiency in the integration of all of these elements. As I said, having an asymmetric economic system is also a terrible idea. Well, people, let's get into the final qualification as we finish. It was a long game for an RTS, but not that much of a big game as a whole, if we compare it to other genres, of course, in terms of raw length, in that sense. So the problem is that it was tedious. There you can see that they are destroying my base, and I have to go back. For example, let me show you another portion, so you have a lot of variety. Well, there you can see that I am going through the bases there, a bit above, a bit ahead. There we destroy that base, and we get to the next one. Conclusion, people. Conclusion. In terms of the 5 categories of the analysis, gameplay is strong, technical is average, level design is absolutely terrible in that sense, lack of objective variety being the main reason, and also ones that we've said. The Grandeur category, I would say, once again, average, and the innovation would be once again good. I would say a bit above average, not being excellent like the gameplay could be in the context of 2001. The problem is the integration of all of those elements at the end of the day, and as I've said, the level design. The efficiency of the integration of all of these elements causes Spellforce 1 Platinum to only improve marginally the level design structure of Heroes of Annihilated Empires. which was the worst of the worst, as I've said. No, basically a succession of basis exploration missions. The campaign was a succession of basis exploration missions, only with your hero unit. It destroys the RTS component of it, a terribly unbalanced proportion. In the case of this game, the proportion is a bit more balanced. You have base building, so it solves that issue somehow correctly. By the tediousness of the level design, the lack of objective variety, making the campaign a succession of skirmishes is definitely not the solution for this. It's a critical flaw. The gameplay mechanics aren't that varied in comparison to the titans of the genre, of course, but definitely Armies of Exigo in retrospective was much better at implementing solutions for all these issues. The same goes for Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Shard, of course, and the Lord of the Rings War of the Ring, and many others. This game also reminds me of Praetorians. Praetorians also suffers from this level design. I haven't played it on stream, but pretty much. But the thing is that that Praetorians is not that long, and not that and you can reset the levels if you fail, and it will go back to the initial state of things. In this game, if you get killed, as I've said, if you lose all of your base and everything, you go back into the level, and it will the enemy units will be persistent, and it will make it impossible. And the only failsafe that they found to fix that is ensuring that the enemy units will not detect you, and lowering the difficulty from 100, impossibility of completion. You never want that. You want it to be 99.9999%, to be the most, for the game to be finishable, but with a high extra complexity of the difficulty. So it's challenging, and it enhances repetition of properly implemented gameplay mechanics, and it enhances how the brain is precisely addicted, how it creates dopamine to enjoy the gameplay mechanics, even if they are repetitive. Okay, because of the broken level design, that is a critical flaw, as I've said, just like Heroes of Annihilate Empires, it improves it a bit. I will award Spellforce 1 Platinum a C+, a bit more than Heroes of Annihilated Empires, but it still has critical flaws in terms of the level design that definitely make this game to be tedious, arduous, not for everyone. And even if you are a seasoned RTS player, I cannot recommend this, because you will see that online what most of the people mention is a storyline as a highlight, and it's not even that impressive. The game has a lot of massive flaws, but as I said, making the level design a succession of skirmishes, and I need to repeat it because it's an essential component, people, and you need to remember it by heart. The level design is a succession of skirmishes. It's a succession of skirmishes that completely breaks the experience 100%. This game is, once again, the epitome, the perfect example of the spiral of decadence, the sad spiral of decadence that the RTS genre suffered in this period of time. And it's so painful for me because I love the genre, but creating a campaign so long with a level design that basically is a succession of skirmishes with no objective variety whatsoever, and you consider that framework in the efficiency of the integration of the RTS and RPG mechanics, it negatively affects all of the aspects of the game 100%. It has a lot of amazing ideas, which is why I presume the second entry and the third entry of this series is they are much better. They are much better. I'll presume that they improved them because they have a cult following and everything. But this initial entry is absolutely bare bones and broken, specifically in the level design. You cannot create a game in which the level design is a succession of skirmishes, no objective variety. As I said, escort missions, defense missions for 30 minutes, you name it. Baseless exploration missions 100%, with a lot of extra components like StarCraft 2 has, for example, or StarCraft 1 or Warcraft 1. I don't know. Warcraft 1 even has a lot of baseless exploration missions that involve puzzles and those things. Much more objective variety. This game has no objective variety. It's just there's no difference between playing this and playing a skirmish match. And that is a critical flaw. That is a critical flaw. The storyline is not that good to compensate for that. The gameplay mechanics are good, not and combined with the innovation, the most positive aspects of the game. But they cannot outweigh as I've said, the average technical aspect, the average storyline and soundtrack, and the terrible level design alongside Heroes of Annihilate Empires. As I've said, the worst, some of the worst that I've seen, and it's sad because with a bit of objective variety, this game would have been amazing. It would have easily been a high 8 or 9 easily, which is the reason why I presume it has a cult following regarding the later entries in the series. But I highly recommend you don't play this game. It's one of those cases in which I will suggest that you go straight for the second entry or the third entry. If they fix that, I don't know. But definitely this first entry is overhyped in that sense. It's definitely not for everyone, and very few people will get enjoyment out of it when making a fair and balanced comparison. Because pretty much you will be in a succession of skirmishes doing the same over and over again. Alright people, and with that we conclude the final analysis of Spellforce 1. Platinum, the RTS genre, is like this. Some games are good, some games are bad. I know a lot of people love this game, so in case you're interested, leave me the comments down below if you're watching this as a YouTube VOD. In the future, I will definitely I'll read them and explain each one of them. But as a definitive conclusion, people, the end result is that objectively the lack of objective variety in the level design category of the analysis is such a critical flaw that ricochets, it bounces, and eliminates any quality in any other aspect that the game has to offer. Alright people, we are finally done with Spellforce 1. With that we'll continue with Drakensang 1, The Dark Eye, on Tuesday, and there's been a change of plans for Thursday. As I always mention, special thanks to all Discord members and Twitch followers of the channel for checking out the review as a Twitch bot. In the future, to all YouTube subscribers for checking it out in the future, and always accompanying me in this metaphysical analysis. But as I've said, because I know this game has a cult following, the lack of objective variety is a critical flaw that in these 3 hours and a half I've perfectly analyzed how it objectively influences the rest of the aspects of the game and makes this a very, very tedious game, very repetitive. As I said, repetitiveness is not bad by itself, but in the efficiency of the integration of all of the elements of the analysis, hence why I use a 5-pronged system, it creates a gameplay loop so so repetitive, with a lack of objective variety, that will be very, very difficult for any of you to play. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been my pleasure. See you all on Tuesday, when we'll continue with Drakensang 1, The Dark Eye, that we started last year, but I had to finish this game. We'll continue with Drakensang 1, The Dark Eye, and the next game for analysis, the next case that we'll do. There's been a change of plans because Electronic Arts, I announced it on Discord, it did a number on my account and did a character server transfer in a game that is very questionable, and I'll fix that, and we'll get to the game as I fix that, because I need to fix that. We'll begin the inverted analysis series, in which we analyze a perfect game that goes from instead of analyzing if it goes from 0 to 10, we'll analyze if it basically a perfect game. We'll analyze a perfect game that then that we'll see why it is so incredible. Because after this, I need a very, very good game. I need a very good game after this. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. See you all on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. I wish you all a great weekend. Hopefully the analysis was enjoyable for all of you. See ya, people. It's been my pleasure. Special thanks to Discord members and Twitch followers, always from the bottom of my heart. Also to YouTube subscribers, but especially to Discord members that accompany me, and Twitch followers that you accompany me here. Ladies and gentlemen, see you all on Tuesday. We'll continue with Drakensang and a very interesting case on Thursday. See ya.